memory begins with a female voice calling Jean, and the narration immediately reveals the truth. His sister skillfully manipulates him. The older sister asks in surprise why he is not eating the cookies their aunt so kindly gave. Angrily, she scolds him for cruelty and tries to make him feel guilty because of their aunt's feelings. Young Jean slyly turns the question back on her. Why doesn't she eat them herself? Pausing in silence, she pouts and crosses her arms, confirming his opinion about her character. Jean notes in his story the strangeness that she forces him to eat tasteless food that she herself does not even touch. New memories flash showing how she, with a distorted sense of justice, cunningly manipulates people. Now his deepest dream is to live completely free from his sister's influence. In the car, Jean impatiently asks if they have arrived yet, and the sister sighs loudly in irritation. Clenching the steering wheel, she sharply replies to him, demanding that he be patient and stop asking. A brief thought reveals his complaint. Since she got her driver's license, she constantly bosses him around. Finally, their car entered the designated parking lot for the evening fireworks. They parked, the trunk creaked open. His sister stretched and complained about how tiring this trip was. She immediately calls out the name Gina, her eyes quickly scanning the boxes of bento and drinks behind. With a sweet but demanding smile, she asks which bag has the sake, completely ignoring his angry look. After a sarcastic hint, "Find the heaviest one," he points her to the correct bag. His sister and her friend cheerfully shout that they are going first, waving goodbye to him. He watches them walk away, confused by the pile of luggage they left him. Resigned to fate, he mutters to himself that it's probably better to handle everything alone. Bending under the weight of the heavy backpack, he pulls himself together, thinking he needs to endure a little longer. His hopeful thoughts about escaping to the university are shattered by a sudden, frightening crash of a car accident. In an instant, he finds himself in the middle of a dense forest, looking around in complete confusion. He cannot comprehend this shocking, abrupt change. He cannot believe it and asks himself, could this really be a parking lot? Horror overwhelms him when he sees that no cars are visible at all. The thickets are anxiously silent, and this confuses him even more and intensifies his deep anxiety. Standing alone with his gear, he cannot comprehend. Is this a dream or some kind of expedition? He pulled out his phone to call for help, but froze when he saw there was no signal at all. Firmly gripping the phone, he forces himself not to panic, although inside the panic only grows. Finally, wandering through the forest, he reaches a river, a possible road back to civilization. He kneels by the shore and admires the pretty river, while the soft sound of water flows soothingly past. With renewed determination, he decides to follow the river downstream a little longer. His long journey finally leads him out from among the trees ahead, stretches an endless sea. Out of breath from the hard walk, he realizes with shock that he has reached the sea. Standing alone on a deserted beach, he wonders what is happening here since he has seen no one. A loud rumbling in his stomach suddenly reminds him that he urgently needs food. He opened the cooler and was overwhelmed with relief. Inside were plenty of drinks and bento boxes. He sits down on the sand and begins to eat his meal, a moment of much-needed rest. Looking around the shore, he rejoiced the beach is impeccably clean, completely free of modern trash. He realizes that night is approaching, so he starts gathering dry branches to make a fire. A wide shot reveals the boundless sky and a dense line of trees of his new, isolated spot. He begins to prepare the kindling, carefully shaving thin, curly shavings from a piece of wood with a knife. He smiled ironically in his mind. Because of his sister's tyranny, he was forced to go to the fireworks. A memory of a survival show surfaces, and he regrets postponing his planned hike. Kneeling down with a bow drill, he starts rubbing the stick with his palms to create friction. He grinds the wood with all his strength, and on his strained face it is clear how hard it is for him. A wave of fatigue overwhelmed him. His hand aches and weakens from the repeated motion. His hand begins to tremble uncontrollably as panic creeps in along with the quickly fading day. He raised his eyes through the branches to the setting sun and felt he must hurry to light the fire. His exhausting efforts finally bear fruit. A thin thread of smoke rises from the firewood. He carefully covers the smoldering ember with his hands and quietly blows, encouraging it to flare into a flame. When the fire finally ignites, he carefully places large logs into the stone-lined fire pit. When night falls, the forest around sinks into thick, impenetrable darkness. The fire crackles cheerfully, a small but saving beacon of warmth and light in the darkness. Completely exhausted, he lies down by the fire and with relief rejoices that he took the jacket. It warms him. He closes his eyes, trying to convince himself that for now everything is fine. Slowly falling asleep, he clings to the desperate hope that all this is just a bad dream. The next morning, he was awakened by the joyful chirping of birds in the treetops. Lying on his back, he feels dizzy and confused, slowly coming to his senses. Sitting up, he looks at the smoldering fire and with a weight in his heart realizes this was not a dream. Panic seized him when he saw that the fire was almost out, only a thin stream of smoke remained. He quickly adds more firewood to the smoldering embers and sighs with relief that was oh so close. He sets off on the road again, hoping to find the city, going in a different direction than yesterday. From insect bites, everything itched, and he reminded himself that later he needed to gather more firewood. While walking, he heard a rustle. He became alert, and involuntarily ran his hand over his face. The journey leads him to the very edge of a high, windy cliff above the sea. A terrible truth dawned on him. The land is completely surrounded by water. It is an island. Now he understood why he couldn't find the city. He felt completely lost and hopeless. His legs gave out and he collapsed, desperately calling out if anyone was here. Only deep silence answered his desperate cry, and his feeling of isolation became even sharper. Sitting broken, he hears a rustle in the grass behind. Someone is approaching. Wandering the forest aimlessly, he asks himself, why is this horror happening to him? He sighs bitterly. He had simply agreed to go with his sister to the fireworks, which he did not want to see at all. The survival instinct kicks in, but he wonders, why does his head automatically think about gathering firewood? The sudden noise of the waterfall catches his attention. He raises his eyes with slight surprise. He freezes from the beauty, not believing that such a place could exist on this island. He sees that the boiling whirlpool right under the majestic waterfall is the true source of the river. On his knees by the roaring water, he convinces himself that he is very close to the riverbed. A small, hopeful smile appears on his face. He feels lucky because of his discovery. He decides to gather branches and return home, wary that the smoke from the fire might give him away. With gloomy consent, he saws a log, accepting that he will probably stay here for a long time. Breathless from the effort, he carries the heavy log on his shoulders back through the forest. He finally starts the project to build a real house, driving sharpened stakes into the ground. Having set one of the posts, he steps back and looks at the work with doubt. Is his construction method reliable? He lifts a long wooden beam into place, and already imagines how he will later reinforce the walls. That evening he sits in the frame of his new house and eats near a small fire. He holds the last packed bento in his hands and suddenly realizes, tomorrow he will have to look for food by himself. A sudden rustle outside makes him shudder, and he peeks, feeling that a beast is lurking nearby. His heart beats wildly in his chest, and it seems to him that it could be a rabbit or maybe even a wild boar. Lying on his simple mat, he sighs wearily, wishing above all to take a bath. The next morning, cheerful bird chirping sounds in the neighboring trees. Wading in the river, he splashes and slides through the water, wounding fish and driving them into a trap. He smiles inwardly in this peaceful solitude. Without other people, fishing is much easier. The freshly caught fish is roasting over the crackling fire, skewered on a split stick. He greedily bites into a large piece of cooked fish, his face fully focused on the food. When he eats, he notices the fresh taste of the fish and feels a strong craving for salt. He glances at the melting drink supplies and decides to start drinking spring water. Turning onto his side to fall asleep, he resolutely decides to start building his house again tomorrow. He drops to his knees and diligently spreads a mixture of mud and clay on the wooden walls. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he proudly surveys the large pile of leaves he gathered for the roof. Standing in the newly roofed hut, he sees that it has become dark and considers whether to make a window here. Through the dark dome of silhouetted trees, the sky breaks through. In the carefully laid stone fireplace, the fire crackles warmly. Jin thoughtfully recalls how he dug a ditch and piled stones to protect himself from the rain. Stroking a worn stone, he suddenly realizes it can be heated and used to warm himself at night. Covered in mud, he thoughtfully thinks about the next step to build himself a real bath. He surveys his finished stone pool and decides, small but enough. A large smooth stone hisses as he lifts it from the roaring fire. With a splash, he throws the heated stone into the water, and it begins to crackle. Heated stones settle at the bottom of the bowl and warm the water. Bathing in the heat, he worries that the stones below might crack from the heat. He sighed deeply with pure satisfaction and relaxed in the hot water. Calmly floating, he grew tired of simple food and strongly desired a hearty stew. Bathing, he suddenly notices the leaves on the mountains are already turning red. Autumn has come. A shiver runs through him as he feels the air around the bath becoming colder. A rural clay pot full of hearty stew is boiling vigorously over an open fire. During lunch, he smiles, realizing that knowledge has allowed him to cook much tastier food. His finished hut nestled among the trees like a beacon in the darkness. A proud smile blossomed on his face when he announced his construction project successful. Soon snow began to accumulate on the distant mountain. It was a sign that winter was approaching. The bitter wind bites his face, and he struggles through the snowy forest, rummaging in search of supplies. On the tree trunk, his gaze fell on a bunch of large mushrooms dusted with snow. For a moment he wonders if they can be eaten, then carefully leaves them and moves on. His tiny hut with a thatched roof pressed against the dark silhouette of the forest. Returning inside, he plopped the pile of gathered firewood on the floor. Crossing his legs, he hunched over the small crackling fire, seeking warmth. Blowing on his hands, he feels a piercing cold and realizes soon snow will not fall here. Staring into the flames, he worries about the fishing and plans to make dry supplies. A deep terror creeps up on him. He asks himself how much longer he can survive. A sharp gust of wind slipped through the crack and pierced him to the bone. He looked into the void at the glowing embers of the fire, and a quiet sound escaped from his chest. The darkness creeping in seems to slowly close in around him. His face full of despair, he wonders if he will die here. He curls up into a ball under the oppressive weight of complete loneliness. In his darkest moment, a bright ball of light cut through the night sky and instantly frightened the young man. The world spun around him as a panicked voice repeatedly apologized for dragging him in. A bodiless voice explains that he was accidentally drawn into the hero's challenge. In his rough hut, the voice shouts that this is not the world he knows. An unexpected guest caught him off guard. The boy only awkwardly uttered, "Ha." The shining sphere repeats its message again, explaining that he ended up in another world because the hero summoned him. Suddenly he demands to be returned, and the light apologetically says it cannot do that. Beside him, Ash and his butler also wait, their faces serious and restrained. Ash approaches Jean with a serious expression, wanting to talk about payment for the potion. Slightly annoyed, Jean asks if this needs to be discussed again, and says he did not expect any compensation. With a gloomy face, Ash admits he never thought the potion would actually work. Jean offers a compromise and promises to ask for payment only when Ash is truly satisfied. Note, Ash Butler intervenes, apologizes, and accepts Jean's generous terms. The scene changes. We find ourselves in a warm, candlelit hall of the local tavern. Inside, Dean cheerfully introduces Jean to a stern, bearded adventurer named Let's. Let's welcome him and say straight out that formalities are not his strong suit. He prefers simple, casual conversation. When they shook hands, Jean realized this must be the restless traveler he had heard about. His friendly expression suddenly changes. He turns around and calls Dean. He grumbles that Dean kept silent about Jean's beauty because he considers her too feminine. Dean winks, admits that he has already made one mistake and cannot afford another. Jean inwardly blamed the multitude of beautiful people around for this awkward situation. When Jean tries to get his attention, he scares those confused around. Embarrassed, Let's apologizes for being confused and suggests moving on. Dean assures that he is just doing what he was asked. Quietly, Jean asks Dean if by any chance they are insecure about handsome men. Their journey begins, and for Jean, it is the first time he hires an adventurer to fulfill a request. The three set off into the forest, their boots crunching on the snow. Let's reveal his cunning strategy for hunting rabbits this season for valuable fur and meat. He explains the tough meat of horned monsters makes this business less profitable. Jin cannot believe it. Rewards for hunting bears have recently fallen. With a drop of sweat on his forehead, Jin thinks that the cause is most likely him and Ash. The traveler begins the lesson, vividly showing how to find animal trails in the grass. Jin is sincerely impressed by Let's' professionalism and cold confidence. Pointing to tracks in the snow, Let's explain what makes a rabbit's gait special. Then he notices other paw prints and confidently says that these are fox tracks. As soon as Jean asks for an explanation, we reveal that the tracks are from a horned rabbit. He guesses this is a monster bee, the claw marks indicating it was chasing prey. Jin thoughtfully runs through his simple method in his head how he uses searching and the sword. Let's be clear, a simple short bow is completely unsuitable for hunting monsters. After long practice with honed skill and intense concentration, he draws the bow and aims. His arrow hits the target, a horned rabbit that squeaks. Note that monsters can be easier targets, they rush straight at you. When one hunt ended, he said he would now show Jean how to hunt a fox. Returning to the city, the merchant enthusiastically praises Let's for the excellent quality of his pelts. Jin is impressed when dealing with business. He becomes strangely talkative and extremely pleasant to communicate with. In honor of the achieved success, the group gathers in the tavern to drink and have fun. Jin sincerely thanks Let's for the valuable lessons he gained during their joint walk. Let's call Jin a weirdo and doubt his decision to study his methods. Jin considers to himself that his fighting style better suits a slender body. Dean cheerfully announced that today he is treating with drinks. The scene shifts to a house cozily nestled at the foot of a snowy mountain under a starry sky. Alone, Jean looks at his hand, in his eyes a new and firm determination. The next day, he decisively starts new training, beginning with energetic push-ups. He visits the workshop of a local craftsman to find out if his special order is ready. The master proudly shows a luxurious, shiny white clawfoot bathtub. After sincere thanks from Jin, the master immediately asked how he plans to transport it. Jin was confused, suddenly realizing he had completely forgotten about logistics. Inside, he panics. He knows he cannot use his ability to hide things in front of people. Stammering, he insists he has a ready plan, and the craftsman offers to wrap it up. The craftsman and his assistant carry the large wrapped tub heavily to a secret corner. When they leave, Jin waits until he is completely alone. He cautiously looks around, searching for any witnesses. He gloomily reflects on how difficult it is to apply his storage ability to such large items. Light snow gently begins to fall on the wooden frame houses of the town. Jean takes on the repair, tears out the old cracked tiles. Then he goes out into the yard and starts digging a trench near the well. Focused and thorough, he lays a new brick wall. Looking at his progress, a proud and satisfied smile blooms on his face. He stands in the newly finished bathroom and declares his project complete. A sudden knock on the door pulls him out of his moment of satisfaction. He opens and Ash is standing on the doorstep, apologizing for disturbing him. Ash explains that he brought a housewarming gift. Surprised that Ash found a new home, Jean asks where it is located. Ash simply points with his finger to the building standing right next to Jean's house. Jean warmly welcomes him to the neighborhood, and Ash apologizes for suddenly being so close. Ash admits his butler found that house, even though he was never told where Jean lives. Jean dismissed the idea of coincidence and admitted, most likely my fault. Recalling the previous conversation with Jean, Ash sincerely admits that he was happy then. Jean froze. The sudden and passionate confession completely stunned him. Feeling cold, Ash asks to be let inside and Jean agrees. Inside the house, Jean smilingly offers his new neighbor a warm drink. They sit side by side at the table, and Jean sincerely thanks Ash for the housewarming gift. The gift turned out to be a beautiful and incredibly appetizing fig tart. After taking a bite, Jean enthusiastically said it was the best tart he had ever eaten in the city. Jean enthusiastically praises how skillfully Ash's butler recommended such a wonderful bakery. The conversation suddenly shifts. Ash changes the subject. He asks Jean with interest if he has recently ordered anything for the house. Jean confirms that he ordered a bathtub, and this clearly embarrassed Ash. Ash presses his lips and blushes when he realizes that a misunderstanding occurred because of the word bath. Jean decides it's better to show than to explain and leads him to a new room. Ash stands stunned in place and not believing whispers, "Is this really a bathtub?" The flawlessly white bathtub on elegant clawed feet shines in the light. Enchanted to madness, Ash admits that he has never seen anything so beautiful. Jean smiles and says that the walls are not dry yet, but invites Ash to try it soon. Joyfully accepting the offer, Ash asks if he can call his butler, Note. In a few moments, Note appears, enters, and bows politely. Ash kneels by the bathtub and together with his faithful butler, admires its beauty with delight. He excitedly tells Note that Jean agreed to let him use it. Jean suddenly becomes confused, completely forgetting that Ash is a young lady. Note, feeling that he must restrain her, admits that he himself is already intrigued. Then two men approach the kitchen and begin to inspect it. Both Ash and Note are surprised that there is not a single unpleasant smell here. Note asks which workshop did Jean hire for such an advanced design. Jean hesitated for a moment, then calmly took the credit upon himself. The butler was left in complete shock by Jean's incredible statement. Ash, looking at the stunned butler, confirms that Jean really did it. The Note insistently asks, did Jean think about registering this invention with the guild? The butler insists that he quickly register it, the decision that made Jean incredibly rich. Amid a fierce blizzard, Jean says in a trembling voice that he is worried about this bad situation. Surrounded by an abandoned snowy forest, he complains about the piercing cold. Finally, it becomes clear why he came to the lake. He needs to make a new bedding. Looking at the horned geese, he impatiently wants to finish the task as soon as possible and return home. With honed caution, his gloved hand places the arrow on the bowstring. Aiming, he held his breath and did everything quietly so as not to startle the prey. The arrow with a thin string on the tail tears through the air and flies straight to the birds. His shot hits one of the geese, and it emits a piercing, painful cry. A victorious smile flashed on his face, and he loudly exclaimed about his success. Standing by the icy water, he prepared to pull out his catch. He is alarmed. Other birds of prey are flying in at the smell of blood. To avoid a new threat, he swiftly activates the ability to teleport. Now safe on the stone path, he sighs with relief. At home, a warm, friendly fire crackles cozily in the fireplace. He decides to warm up a bit before going out again to continue hunting. Soon, a fist firmly knocks on the wooden door. Note, the butler opens the door and warmly greets Jean Dono. Jean replies that his project is progressing well, all thanks to the valuable help of Note. Ash explains that Note was the foreman, so the house became very crowded. For the housewarming, Jean gives Note a large, neatly wrapped futon. The butler froze in amazement when he learned that it was made from the feathers of horned geese. He exclaims that it must be an incredibly expensive luxury item. Ash wonders how he managed to hunt such vigilant geese and considers the gift unnecessary. Jean awkwardly admits that he did not appreciate its true value because it cost him almost nothing. Noticing the opportunity, Ash invites both Jean and Note to join her for dinner. Note tries to apologize and says to his master, "Enjoy your meal." The butler insists that it is inappropriate for him to dine with Ash. Ash is unceremonious, and Jean confirms that the invitation is for both. Before them unfolded a luxurious feast. In the center, a huge roasted piece of meat, around it many other dishes. Jin says with admiration that he prepared his own version of fig tart. Note looks enchanted at the luxurious roast of horned geese. A close-up shows how the perfectly baked skin of the roasted meat shines. The three sincerely thank for the food and only then begin to eat. After biting a piece of tart, Ash lit up and exclaimed, "Delicious." He savors the exquisite turnip soup, carefully memorizing the recipe. Jean watches as a shad dives headfirst into the food, and this makes him a little uneasy. Watching her eat, he feels that he is beginning to understand her better. Ash sincerely says that tasty food always lifts her mood. Jin reaches out for his piece of tart, and Note rushes to intervene. Suddenly, a black spirit crashed into the tart and completely destroyed the dessert. Note and Ash are watching, their faces serious and focused. Jin stands in complete confusion and asks, "What just happened?" His spirits press the black invader against the wall, whose origin Ash does not know. He decides that it is better not to admit to the butler that he sees spirits. Realizing that he will have to explain himself, he prepares to pretend that he knows nothing. He suddenly says, "Let's arrange a temperature shock," and immediately volunteers to bring another tart. Jin walks away, and his mind races ahead. He is looking for how to solve this. Note silently watched him go, his gaze knowing and thoughtful. In another room, Jin anxiously thinks about how to hold the captured spirit. He mumbles that now he is in trouble, using a jar for pickling. He enthusiastically praises his spirit companions Rose and Han for their excellent work. He comes across an enameled container. He is glad, good thing he brought it from another house. Note's voice from the threshold suddenly struck him. A quiet voice sounded, "What happened?" Jean was even surprised. Note apologizes and confesses the spirit turned out to be his familiar. Jean finally understands that all the trouble is because of that Note, and learns that the spirit's name is Quinn. Note quietly tells about the oath of his family, never to surpass the main branch of the Alderheads. He points to his features: ash-gray hair and amber eyes. Jean asks Ash if he knows that Note can communicate with spirits that he cannot. He silently wonders why, after they were renounced, do they not live freely. Riley tells Note that his spirit should enter through the front door next time. Note peers into the container and instantly senses its special fermented smell. Jean has come to terms with the fact that the butler now knows his secret. The scene smoothly transitions into a quiet night under a starry sky. A new day awakens in a bustling port town, where ships quietly stand in the harbor. Jin steps onto the bustling market. His information gathering begins. The fishmonger shoos away the curious white cat from his goods. Jin pauses for a moment, gazing into the lively hustle of the port. He recalled hearing about how his sister carelessly used magic in these parts. The diagram shows how human magic initially drains power from spirits. The exhausted spirit eventually harbors a deep resentment. This smoldering resentment is what ultimately turns the spirit into a monster. Jen is here to find out if the hero's magic has changed the world around. He eavesdrops on fishermen angrily complaining about constant raids by people from Schluntas. Another fisherman says bluntly, during the raids several of his men were wounded. They complain that the local hero only causes them problems. Someone grimly wishes for a Lord Demon to appear and deal with this situation. The pickpocket tries to pull out his pouch, but Jean grabs him lightning fast. He mentally reviews the pickpocket's attempt. He waved off the investigation and headed home with a package of fresh seafood. An exterior shot shows his large stone house covered in white snow. A delicious plate of fresh and baked oysters is already waiting to be savored. He tastes a fresh oyster and his face lights up with genuine pleasure. He is grateful that his skill in appraisal allows him to eat them without any worries. Other incredibly tasty ways to prepare oysters come to his mind. Looking at the leftovers, he wondered whether to marinate them in oil. He calls to play with his fluffy companion, Rish. Rish raises the outstretched hand to his nose and sniffs it with a curious expression. The dog-like creature turned its head away and snorted lightly. The genie wonders, does Reese dislike the sharp smell of seafood? Noticing the daylight fading, he casually asks to turn on the light. The window explodes with a dazzling white flash. He recoils from the pain, covering his burning eyes with his hands. He decides to work on magic control before going to the guild. He steps into the demon forest to begin his training. He releases a powerful fireball directly at the growling monster. The spell engulfs the terrible horned rabbit in a whirl of flames. He realizes he is stronger than he thought and must take control of this power. Montage shows him smashing monsters one by one with various elemental spells. He feels that thanks to concentration training, he has become much better. Standing over a pile of fallen monsters, he worries, did he overdo it on the hunt? In the dark forest, a young man magically gives birth to a tiny ball of light. Under the clear daytime sky, a huge adventurer's guild building with a wooden frame appears. Jean approaches the guild doors, planning to check the task board for information. He overhears from inside a passionate voice, insisting on an investigation deep in the forest. Peeking inside, Jean sees a blond man sighing and regretting that there are no three-horned monsters. A guild official named Dean firmly, decisively states that he will not approve such a risky expedition. Pounding his fist, Dean vividly emphasized how formidable those three-horned beasts were. The blonde Chris insists that their absence means a much scarier threat, stained by a black shadow. Jean was completely confused by the theatrical and tense manner of this striking man. He anxiously tries to understand where this name Chris, just spoken by Dean, comes from. Two others, a young man and an older man, confirm that Jean has just returned. Noticing him, Chris enthusiastically greets Jean with a strange title, Bear Killer Dono. The nickname struck Jean, while Chris meanwhile began praising him for his supposed understanding. In the flashback, it is seen how Dean previously grumbled at the blonde Dean and the nobility. To himself, Jean decides that this man is a real headache. Chris smiles at him charmingly, gives another strange nickname, and seems to reveal the Twilight. Jean, completely embarrassed by the new name, listens as his companion agrees that it fits. The man introduces himself as Chris Eads, a 3-star adventurer of silver rank. Shaking his hand, Jean awkwardly asks him to stop poetically describing his features. Chris quietly hums to himself, thoughtfully examining their hands folded together. Then he directly asks O Evening Twilight to join his hunt. Jean was stunned, realizing that he was unwillingly dragged into something strange. On the chapter cover, Chris again repeats his polite request for Jean to go with him. Jean's inner voice only confirmed he was really stuck in some strange situation. He points out a flaw in Chris's logic, and Dean can barely hold back laughter. Chris admits he hasn't seen monsters, but something deeply unsettles him in the forest. With shining confidence, he says he bets everything on his intuition. Dean is impressed. He doesn't understand how Chris can rely solely on some hunch. Dean, unable to hold back, decisively told Chris, "Hurry up, explain yourself." Jean tries to calm everyone and suggests waiting until spring to hunt. Jean's older friend wonders to himself whether Chris's intuition is hiding something truly special. He explains to Jean that Chris might be under the influence of an invisible oracle spirit. The man explains, essentially, Chris is possessed by a spirit. Jean understands. Such a spirit's favor is taken very seriously. Seers of spirits are almost impossible to find. He suddenly realizes that Chris might have barely noticeable abilities, the skill to foresee or resistance to sunburns. Dean complains that for such a hunt he will have to participate personally on his Silver Ranger. Chris, with a sly smile, reminds him of the debt that Jean owes to the guild, and that it concerns his sister. He explains the mission is short and the target is only one monster. Dean eagerly wants to invite golden rank adventurers to protect the town. Chris again insists that the atmosphere in the forest is simply abnormal. A quiet, silver-haired boy sharply interrupts the argument and demands that they finally get to the point. Dean turns to Jean and begs him to join the forest expedition. Jean waved off with one quick hand movement and instantly sharply refused. Dean instantly revises his offer, saying that Jean will only be a baggage porter. Jean quietly admits to himself he is a little curious about what is going on here. He finally gives in and agrees to go. This greatly pleases and surprises Dean. Jean set a condition: he wants Ash and Knott's friends to go with him. Dean agrees. Let's wait until spring, that way we will avoid heavy snow. Later, Jean sits by the campfire, and outside his window, a snow-covered house is visible. He suspects that his sister's restless magic is causing chaos in the forest. Hating to clean up after her, he decides to go into the forest himself and figure things out. He heads into the ominous depths of the demonic forest under the night sky. He stands alone in the silence of the snow, preparing to visit the local spirits. Activating his vision, he saw a world teeming with countless glowing spirits. A tiny winged spirit, like a fairy, lightly flutters through the magical air. A spirit in the form of a fox jumps through shimmering sparks of light. A dark, shapeless spirit stain ominously floats among the others. He notices that some spirits are weakening, shrinking, and even disappearing completely. He watches in horror as a healthy black spirit devours a dying one. On closer inspection, it is clear that the black spirit is hunting a weakened, cross-eyed creature. Janu finds it extremely unpleasant to watch this act of spiritual cannibalism. Realizing that his healing will not work, he decides to give them names to provide them with stability. He sharply extends his hand and firmly grasps the small shadow spirit in his palm. Holding the creature gently, he names it Black. He comes across another dark spirit and names it Black too. Gently hugging the dark rabbit-like spirit, he named it Black 3. The shadow squirrel-like spirit in his hands suddenly transformed into Black 4. Feeling the tension from the effort taking its toll, he decides, that's enough for today. He feels that naming these reluctant spirits drains a lot of his energy. Chasing after them has become too tiring, so he decides to continue the work tomorrow. He walks through the snow, leaving tracks behind, and approaches the stone house. Standing by the door, he shouted, asking if Denoso is here. Denoso greets him with an incredibly strong hug, to which Jean is still not accustomed. Jean presents his gifts, wine and cake, and Denoso simply glows with delight. The children in the house greet him with shining, joyful faces. They pounced on him in group hugs. He only confirmed that they are incredibly affectionate. Denoso gratefully accepts a pouch of wine from his friend. Shiva, the mother, thanks him and suggests everyone enjoy the cake together. Denoso sadly complains about his wonderful wine, while Shiva asks what they were doing before his arrival. The basket of beans seems to hint at their winter work, cleaning beans and repairing farm tools. Jean offers to help the children with work near the fire. Shiva approaches, carrying pieces of cake she just made for everyone. The children, with joyful smiles, savor the delicious cake that Jean brought for them. Tina, Denoso's daughter, boldly says that she will marry Jean someday. While Shiva laughs at this statement, Denoso decisively forbids it. He insists that Tina once promised to marry him, and Jean tries to ease the tension. Denoso exploded with anger at Jean's because of his "not yet." He felt that he was insulting his daughter. And then two young boys suddenly declared that instead they would marry members of Jean's family. They cling to Jean, and he cannot believe how tightly they hold him. Denoso stands, embarrassed and broken after his son's unexpected confession. He bursts into the cheerful bustle, trying to pull his sons away from the embarrassed Jean. Shiva and Tina watch that family confusion and laugh joyfully. Observing from the side, he thought that his own family had never been so warm. With the arrival of spring, it was finally time to set out on the expedition. Chris greeted Jean and Ash with his pompous nicknames Evening Twilight and Moonlight Glow. Jean puzzledly raises his eyebrows at yet another strange nickname, shaking Chris's hand. The bearded traveler named Let's calls Jean and greets him warmly. He whispers to Jean to be careful, the fight will be taken by Chris's team. Another adventurer worries about Let's inexperience, but Let's explains the bear hunter is Ash. Ash quietly confirms this, leaving Chris and another adventurer puzzled. A harsh adventure makes everyone remember. Ash is a bear hunter, but he denies it. He insists that their companion, a young man named Jean, started this whole situation. Hearing this, the flamboyant blonde named Chris burst into delighted, flowery laughter. He says his guess about Twilight was correct, and this makes Jean wonder if some spiritual influence is at work here. Jean finally confidently understands that behind the strange nickname stands Chris's own spirit. He froze, enchanted by how a tiny fairy gently strokes Chris's prominent chin. A woman from the guild, Kina, addressed the group and eagerly awaited working with them. She politely thanks Jean for the cooperation and sincerely apologizes for all previous inconveniences. Her gaze fell on his backpack, and she asked to look at its size later. At farewell, she handed him a decorated vial, a gift from the guild. She sincerely wishes them a safe return while the squad prepares to set out on the expedition. As soon as we are on the trail, let's ask about the peculiarity of Jean's bag and what is hidden inside it. Jean proudly says that he made this leather bag himself, and the rolled-up roll on top is his bedding. His comrades anxiously said that the bulky futon could become a burden in battle. He clearly shows the practical design, how the straps and clips allow it to be easily detached. Chris unfavorably compares his bag and jokingly scolds his gentle spirit who is stroking his chin. The group of 4 adventurers confidently strides into the very heart of the forest. They move with practiced ease, faces focused as they make their way through the wild wilderness. After some time, one of the companions waved his hand, indicating it was time to stop and have lunch. Having made good progress, the group sets up a small camp near a babbling brook. Jean kneels by his backpack and pulls out a large pot for their meal. Over the fire, he cooks a thick stew of dried chicken, onions, and mushrooms. When the ingredients bubble cheerfully in the cauldron, he exclaims that the dish is ready. Then he focusedly moves on to another part of the lunch he prepared specially. He brings out an impressively large and beautifully arranged tray of shiny, stuffed sandwiches for everyone. His companion, barely holding back drool, looks admiringly at the incredible lunch Jean brought. When Jean offers to share, everyone eagerly rushes to the appetizing food. Another traveler praises the meat, though he prefers hard bread and asks about the coating. The eldest in their group note looks surprised, repeating the word. Jean enthusiastically explains the breading and frying process, silently hiding his complex sauce recipe. Ash picks up a piece of fried chicken and with admiration praises its rich, aromatic flavor. Jean lists the complex spices, a recipe that Note diligently memorizes. Sated and satisfied after the meal, the travelers decide that it is time to move on. The group's boots thump along the grassy path. They set off on the road again. Jin sees that his own shoes are getting dirty and wonders if it is because of his gait. He gazes at the shiny banknotes and flawless shoes and admires the skill of the butlers. He decided to repeat the butler's gait, but his attention was instantly drawn to Chris's warning about wolves. Chris explains that wolves hunt in packs and urges them to take the initiative into their own hands. Jean and Ash listen tensely to the orders, nodding simultaneously. They accept the battle plan. Jin admits to himself that Chris is a careful leader, although he annoys him a little. Suddenly someone shouts a warning. A sinister pack of horned wolves jumps out of the forest. For some unknown reason, the wolves began to circle and tighten the circle around Jean, singling him out. Riley realizes, to them he is probably the weakest, and at that moment one of the comrades shouts his name. With a determined expression, he raises his sword ready to face the immediate, direct threat. He rushes forward, the blade becoming a blurred streak of motion. He prepares to strike. He crouched low, tense and focused, the polished steel of his sword gleaming, ready for battle. He unleashes a powerful, wide horizontal swing that cuts through the air toward the furnace. After the fight, everyone stood stunned, looking at the fallen wolves and doubting Jean's strength. Chris exclaimed excitedly that Jean was luring men, and Jean, embarrassed, denied it. Dean noticed that Jean was more than she seemed, and felt that his own skills were insufficient. Calmly, Note began gathering the horns, warning that the blood would attract other monsters. Dean agreed with the assessment and resolutely urged the group to leave this place as quickly as possible. The group made their way further through the darkening forest, approaching their camp for the night. The chapter ends ahead opens the next part of their forest expedition. Arriving at the camp, Jean quickly and skillfully set up a simple but effective tent shelter. Plopping down on the ground, he looked over his work with satisfaction and decided it was enough. The companion approaches and says in surprise that he did not expect to see such skills in camp breaking from Jean, because he himself said he did not like it. Chris theatrically praises Jean's genius and Jean calmly clarifies, "I can do it, but I don't like it." He admits that his survival skills were hardened when he lived alone on an island for several months. Impressed by how Jean turned moss into a soft pillow, Chris decides to go and gather more. The others still joined him. Although one of them was worried in his culture, it is not accepted to pick moss from the mountain. Two of the men shouted that they would go catch fish for dinner. Jean suggests cooking hot soup for everyone, just what is needed on this cold night. The pot quietly bubbles over the fire, promising a cozy and hearty meal for the tired travelers. Jean announces the menu, hearty tomato soup, saying he just needs to knead the dough. Dean scratches his head. A vague, confused memory of a past conversation flickers in his mind. He watches enchanted by Jean's strange gestures over the dough and wonders if it is some kind of ritual. Under Jean's touch, the dough seems to magically grow into a large, perfectly smooth, shimmering ball. He decided to let the dough rise and thought that it could also be made into breakfast. When night falls, the company sits in a circle around the campfire under a scattering of stars. A lavish banquet spread out on the table, steaming soup, golden-baked fish, and a large pizza. When asked, Jean explained, "The pizza is made of cheese, bacon, and asparagus gathered in the forest." Chris, puzzled, says he has never heard of a dish called pizza. Dean, still confused, asks Jean about that strange ritual he performed earlier. He takes a piece and a long string of melted cheese stretches from his mouth. His eyes widened with delight, and he exclaimed that the new dish is simply incredibly tasty. Note expressed his refined comment and suggested adding tomato sauce would also go perfectly. The elder man looked thoughtfully. It was clear that the suggestion to use tomato sauce surprised him. A sudden realization struck Jean. Had he ever seen a fresh tomato? He thinks about sun-dried tomatoes in the soup, while Ash enthusiastically praises their taste. Jean on Chris Pete's shoulder, and his face is sincere and slightly moved. He says that Jean would be a wonderful wife, and regretfully adds that he is a man. Dean bluntly asks Jean what his type is, and immediately worries whether his sister is too flat. Ash, confused, blurts out that Dean has such a huge chest, not at all what a woman would want. Note looks and suddenly realizes that because of this conversation he got into trouble. Jean admits that he is still getting used to people, so he doesn't know what his type is. When he admits that he only knew unreliable people, a memory of a young woman suddenly surfaces. Chris lets jokingly dismiss the thought that the confessions he received were cruel pranks. Dean hints that those confessions could have been sincere, and the confessors immediately blushed with shame. Jean retells the confessions tape. Each story is from different people in their youth. The companion is stunned by this number and jokingly asks if Jean is cursed. Let's admit his genes are in a special situation, and let's try to calm him down. Not all women are like that. Jean's face darkened as he admitted his sister was to blame for everything. The flashback shows his sister with friends. Obviously, they were all involved with her. He explains that he felt like her possession and ultimately just played by her rules. Chris pats him on the shoulder and says a simple encouragement to lift his spirits. Ash fell silent, his face gloomy and thoughtful after Jean's story. The forest stood still in silence under the starry sky, and the night watch began. Jean sits alone by the crackling campfire and slowly sips from a cup in the cold air. He raises his eyes to the night sky and wonders why it is still cold here. On the night watch, Jean gladly greets his little bird companion Aza as she perches on his shoulder. A voice came from the darkness, offering to take Jean's watch. Jean lifts his head and sees Ash approaching him in the dim light of the fire. Ash offers a Florentine cookie for a snack, and Jean sincerely thanks him for everything. Putting on the garment sewn by Jean, Ash says with surprise how light and comfortable it is. Jean modestly explains that the coat is just a hobby, and adds that the debt for the potion has already been paid. The light brings a terrible state. One can enter this new world only at the threshold of death. Irritated, he points out the contradiction in the statements, showing that he is completely confused. His face stiffened with rage and he resolutely demands to know, where the hell are we? A vision appears before his eyes, a fantastic world of magic and swords, where knights, mages, and dragons wander. He is still a skeptic and wonders, how can someone believe in this when they have not seen a single fantasy trope themselves? Smoothly hovering, the light clarifies that it was once a god, and its power has now significantly diminished. It cheerfully adds that although it is not clear now whether it exists, its power will eventually return. The former god explains that the true purpose of the summoning is only to momentarily unite two worlds. Overwhelmed by tangled cosmic voices, the young man grabs his head and understands nothing. The sphere explains that only 3 people on the brink of death can be summoned. And suddenly shock, the sphere admits that it did not notice him along with the Haruka's group. He connects the facts into one picture and asks himself, is his sister Haruka the true heroine and was he supposed to die? He recalls a voice that said he still had life left in his native world. Suddenly he finds himself face to face with 3 beautiful, almost ethereal women and freezes in surprise. The group turns out to be larger a pantheon of gods, among whom are a gray-haired elder and a young boy. Dark-haired Wan sharply criticized Himha reacted too slowly. She decides first we will listen to his wishes, and we will deal with the accident later. He hesitates and suddenly at their feet quietly appears a small fluffy creature resembling a wolf. Rish the wolf-like creature anxiously admits, the accident happened because of him, the draft failed. The young man is boiling with rage and insists that it is not his fault, and the old woman asks whom he will choose. Van with one sharp glance made the little god fall silent and ordered him to wait. Fixing her gaze on him, she offers him a choice which deity will become his guardian. Van introduced herself and with a cold smile, offered to fulfill any of his wishes in exchange for the rest of his life. The majestic woman introduced herself, Rudial goddess of earth and the magic of silence. The old man with a long white beard announced that he is Kato, lord of plants and order. A serious-looking boy with light hair says that he is Ish, guardian of water and healing. The old woman in a dark hood introduces herself, Pal, goddess of earth and harvest. A cheerful girl with wavy hair winks and you understand. This is Mistu, mistress of light, wind, romance, and whims. Stunningly beautiful Kal Alpha proclaims her dominion over light, love, and beauty. A gentle hand strokes the sleeping wolf creature named Rish, the god of ice and darkness, whose power has faded. Jean irritably thought to himself, Rich used to be so confident, although his power is now slowly fading. A bit embarrassed, he asks if the powers of the gods can overlap one another. Mistu and Van insist. Even weakened, Rish's power is so strong that it can be considered the power of a god. Supporting his chin with his hand, Gina is asked which of the gods he prefers. Standing before the gathered gods, he asks, should he choose them all? The wise god Kato sadly warned that Jean's life is too short to receive all their powers without weakening his defense. The gods explain, they so rarely gather all together that trying to choose each one gives no advantage. Kato adds that the granted power will manifest as the god who grants it is. Mistu offers a tangled analogy about emotions, placing love, friendship, and obsession side by side. Completely puzzled by her logic, Jean admits to himself that he cannot comprehend her reasoning. Kato reduces everything to one thing. He tells Jean simply to think about what he wants from his new life. The young man thoughtfully repeats this question to himself, pondering what he truly wants. He sincerely says that he dreams of living in comfort, without restrictions and even without desires. With a serious look, he adds the most important condition: no relationships with the older sister. He asks for a power that will allow him to freely explore this new world completely alone, without her. The soaring wolf Rish praises Haruki's justice, but Jean cuts in. She only uses it as a tool. Cattle asks if Jean felt that flow of power that passed when Haruka received her abilities. After all, it nourishes the gods. Confused and enraged, Jin demands to know what terrible powers were given to his sister. A chill ran down his spine when he learned that she received power and all the magic, and this strengthened his resolve. Close up a hand preparing to give him a gift or power. Seeing Ash's gloomy expression, Jean became worried and thought, maybe they didn't like those Florentine biscuits he offered. Ash gently suggested that those past romantic confessions were just accidental jokes, and Jean was momentarily left speechless. Suddenly something clicked in Jean. Ash means their previous conversation and is trying to cheer him up. Jean admits that he is learning to trust people again, and Ash is glad to be part of this. He quietly accepts Ash's kind words. A little bird settled on his shoulder. Ash takes up guard duty, sits by the campfire, and Jean agrees to allow them. He smiles inwardly. Ash always speaks directly, and simple, straightforward compliments make him a little embarrassed. Ash's open and sincere nature is a truly refreshing contrast to his sister's character. After handing over the watch, Jean decided it was time to rest before the next day. The travelers gladly eat a hearty meal in the wild. It seems to taste better than in the city. 2 men greedily devour fried meat, and one of them exclaims with fervent desire that he really wants a drink. Sitting by the campfire, the company anxiously notices the strange absence of mighty monsters on their path. Jin closes his eyes and thinks that a wonderful glass of red wine would be just what is needed. The elder gentleman agrees, enthusiastically describing the complex flavors of the drink as a perfect complement to the meat. From their conversation, Jin pondered that name and concluded, "Een must be red wine." A woman named Chris still marvels at how Jin can bake bread in a pot. He explains that pâté made from the liver of the black mountain goat was prepared in salt water, not milk. Jin secretly thinks that probably only he here cares about healthy eating. Chris points to the improvised tent by the river and asks if that is their shelter for the night. Correcting her, Jin admits that he made a steam bath and Chris only became more puzzled. He tells that while they were hunting, he crafted a dome from flexible branches and sheets. Inside, Chris looks confusedly at the neatly arranged pile of stones for the campfire. Jin shows how it works. He takes a ladle and pours water on the hot stones. They sizzle. A cloud of steam burst from the stones, which both frightened and fascinated Chris with wide-open eyes. He explains how everything happens, sweats in the sauna, and then enjoys diving into the cool river. Looking at him with new admiration, Chris calls him by the nickname Twilight. She praises his unparalleled gift for making journeys cozy, a subtle but very significant compliment. Jin smiles and offers his companion Chris to use the steam room he made himself. The rest of the company overheard, and their surprised faces caught Jin off guard. Feeling their piercing gazes, he awkwardly extends an invitation to everyone. The whole company enthusiastically agrees to his offer to steam in the sauna. A large white sheet in which they bathed hangs on a tree branch. Later that night, Jin hangs the wet sheet and says they will have to sleep without a cover. By the stream, a small shadowy creature suddenly disturbs the calm surface of the water. He stands at the very edge of the water and watches how a multitude of spirits gather in the moonlight. His thoughts again drift to the disturbing sight that he notices more and more often. The young man admits he wants to name the black spirits but is afraid that he will be noticed. The morning light breaks through the dense forest canopy and announces the beginning of a new day. The entire expedition continues its path along the trail through the forest. Do you feel renewed? Dean and Chris happily note how wonderful they feel after the bath. Their cheerful walk suddenly stops. Dean loudly shouts to everyone, "Stop." Ahead appears a lizard monster, and he realizes that it is the three-horned variant. Let's call this creature tenacious and warn the group. Wait for Dean's command. Dean explains that the lizard has such tough skin that its throat is the only weak spot. The plan is agreed upon. Dean orders Chris to split up, and she confirms that she is ready. Chris's boot cuts into the grass as she takes her strategic position. Acting as bait, she skillfully draws all the attention of the large reptiles onto herself. Dean bursts in from the side of the monster, his face showing only intense concentration. His lightning-fast strike towards the monster creates the perfect distraction. While the lizard is distracted, Dean shouts Chris's name, a signal for the final attack. Chris lunged forward, her blade sinking deep into the monster's exposed throat. Ash and Note enthusiastically praise Chris for her brilliant work, once again confirming her formidable reputation. We must admit that although he acted flawlessly, this fierce battle still shook him. Jin thinks that their coordinated work is a skill you can't learn just by watching. The very fact of the three-horned lizard's appearance so deep in the forest is undeniable proof. Let's say right away, monsters here usually have only one horn and not always. Suddenly they realized they had ended up in this huge forest for the weak shocks Gene. Dean announced with relief that their main goal was finally accomplished. Let's outline their plan, first move to the next camp and then return to the city. Then Chris asks Jean, will he help her dissect the body of this creature? In the forest clearing, Jean watches as Let skillfully dissects a large lizard. Let's lift our eyes from the work and praise Jean. What an impressive skill he has in dissection. Jean accepts the praise with a slight smile and explains that he learned to hunt in his own way. Seriousness covers him. Around him, he sees many black spirits. He wonders if these dark spirits inhabit the horned monsters, creating them. Musa suggests roasting the lizard meat and asks Jean about their supplies of lard. Jean confirms they have plenty and decides to go look for wild asparagus. Let's warn him about hungry monsters. Jean gratefully nods in response. During the search, Jean finds mushrooms and garlic mustard and is already planning future pasta from them. To make it easier to find food, he decided to activate his special searching ability. He activates the skill, a memory surfaces that he has already used it while dissecting a lizard. His search confirms the suspicion a fox appears, which he had glimpsed earlier. He recognizes it. This is a fast two-horned monster rushing straight toward their camp. Realizing that it associates fire with prey, Jean knows he needs to warn Let's. He rushes back to the camp and, barely breathing, urgently warns the others that a monstrous fox is approaching. Let's calmly reveal that he has already masked their scent with cedar leaves. Then he hands Jean an ointment to hide his scent before they hide. From his hiding place, Jin froze the fox was running incredibly fast. The monstrous fox bursts into the clearing with stunning strength and speed. Let's, surprised by its sudden appearance, confidently says that he will defeat it. The entity ignores him and turns its full gaze on Jin, a face-to-face fight. He shouts, desperately trying to divert the monster's attention from his friend. With a determined look, Jin prepares to face the direct attack of the fox monster. The fierce fox now lies on the ground, whining and dizzy. We stand frozen and full of distrust, asking ourselves what just happened to that creature. Jin confidently confirms he single-handedly defeated the two-horned monster. Bright, pompous Chris approaches and, smiling, calls Jean by her strange nickname Evening Twilight. She takes his hand and enthusiastically says how amazing his legs are for a bronze rank adventurer. Ash and his butler have arrived, and Ash sighs with relief Jin is safe. After a tense and unexpected encounter, a moment of silence follows. Let's look at the defeated fox. She is still amazed by Jin's incredible strength. He anxiously expresses his concern to the group about this sudden new threat. Let's explain why nomadic fox monsters are much more dangerous than territorial lizards. Looking seriously, Ash warns his comrade. The three-horned monster is about to threaten the city. Jean feels the threat growing and notices a fox with two horns. Roger grimly decisively decides they must return to the town the very next morning. A large cauldron with meatballs bubbles cheerfully over the crackling fire. Jean doubts their mass bird hunting, but his companion insists it was insanely tasty. Another traveler enthusiastically praised the pasta, noting that dishes in the wild were better than city food. The sun brightly breaks through the lush forest canopy. The group returns through the forest. The road home turns out calm, without adventures. With determined faces, Ash and Roger lead the group out of the forest. They approach the massive barred gates of the city. The expedition is over. Returning to the city, Jean sighed deeply with relief. Ash orders everyone to go to the guild, and Jean is clearly worried. He quietly asks Ash and Note to bring his reward later, as he already wants to go home. Ash worries and suggests to Jean to come to him later to wash up. Roger asks Jean, "Where are you rushing to?" Agreeing to the request, Roger agrees to talk with him about the spirits later. Jean comes to a large stone house with a wooden frame. This is his temporary home. Completely exhausted, he puts down the firewood near the hearth and lets out a heavy sigh. Tiny winged fiery spirits and a salamander flicker among the tongues of flame. He enthusiastically explains his system, how the stone spirits transmit messages between his houses. Using his ability to store, he magically preserves some hot water. He intends to heat the bath with his magic to use it later. In the flicker of energy, he used teleportation and found himself in another of his homes. He calls his little dog-like friend Risha, who is sleeping in a basket. Risha wakes up and joyfully throws herself into Jean's arms as he greets his favorite. He gently tells the creature that it must wash before they can play. Diving into the hot water, Jean exhales a long, satisfied sigh. Now clean, he recalls that he had to wash 3 times to remove all the dirt. A fire spirit appears, and he sincerely thanks it for informing him about the arrival of guests. He uses his ability to teleport again. He wants to quickly prepare everything. Noticing that the water in the bath is barely warm, he decides to drain it and fill it again. He magically refills the bath with fresh, steaming hot water. Opening the door, he sincerely apologizes to Ash and Noto for making them wait. He extends a heavy pouch of money, showing his share of the reward. Then Jean says that he has prepared a hot bath for both of them. The butler, by the way, addresses Ash as Ajusama and prepares to assist her. Later, the 3 of them relax with toasts and drinks. Note, enchanted by that luxurious bath, asks Jean where he bought it. Jean says it is from the kingdom of Pester, a long and expensive journey. He smiles thoughtfully. These foreign cutlery can make people think he is from there. The note asks to buy the robes that Jean lent them, but Jean instead gives them as a gift. The butler's face darkened when he spoke about their investigation in the forest. He announces that a strike team is being formed and both he and Ash must join. Because of this exhausting journey, Note insists they cannot accept the robes for free. Jean tries to refuse payment, insisting that it is more than acceptable. The very sight of the banknotes, like a threat, forces the reluctant Jean to take the money. After the bath, Ash comes out and loudly announces that she is finished. Jean offers to prepare the next batch of hot water and some tea for Ash. Politely declines her offer to help, citing the duties of a butler. Note apologized and stepped away, leaving Jean and Ash alone for a moment. Jean, handing her a cup, smiles and says, "Make yourself at home." For the first time, he sees her with her hair down and does not hide his surprise. He shudders at her sudden deadly aura and cautiously asks what happened. The atmosphere darkened and became heavy, enveloping everything with a sense of impending doom. She asks him if he has seen spirits in the forest. He confirms. Ash recalled that he had not seen spirits in such a pitiful state since some mage rebelled. In the memory appears a devastated landscape filled with shadowy, distorted figures. Jin, who has never seen magic, with a curious sparkle in his eyes, asks if this is a rare ability. Ash explains that spirits can be forced by contracts or destructive spells. He was gripped by horror upon learning that, when a spirit's power is exhausted, the spirit itself disappears. She confirms this, adding that the black tint proves their malice towards people. Jin asks if this means that mages will eventually become monsters too. A sinister smile appears on his face as he realizes that his sister is becoming the mistress of demons. Ash explains that magic can make spirits resilient and grant them permanence. Jin knows if you don't pressure the spirits too much, they will gladly lend a helping hand. She looks at Azu and says that the spirit chose to stay with her rather than become black. It hurts Ash to compare devoted Azu with those black spirits that became corrupted. Jin notices that Ash is deeply shaken upon seeing the distorted spirits. He gets up from the table, decided to do something to help. He asks the puzzled Ash to wait a moment while he prepares something himself. Returning with a tray, he smiled warmly and thanked her for waiting. He extends a plate of treats and quietly asks her to keep them a secret from note. On the plate is a tempting selection of pastries, a delicate chew profiterole, an aromatic tart, and a soft cake. Ash from Azu on the shoulder admits that she has never seen such sweets before. Jin explained that he would like her to be his taster. He gently tells her that dwelling on perfumes for too long is not good. Ash sincerely thanks him for the food and prepares to take the first bite. She hesitantly brings a piece of profiterole to her lips. After tasting, her expression instantly turned into pure, rosy delight. They sit side by side and Jean asks if it is tasty, gently encouraging her to drink tea. She bites a piece of cake, her cheeks puffing out as she chews. Her eyes widen with delight and a happy blush spreads across her face. She enthusiastically says that everything is incredibly delicious, especially the white cream, and asks about the tart. Ash asks about that red berry and Jean smiles and says it is a strawberry. He feels guilty, worrying that the young lady should not eat unfamiliar things. He asks if she likes sweets and sincerely admits that it was his only way to comfort her. Ash peacefully swallowed the tea and her mood immediately noticeably improved. She admits that she is actually happy and wonders how easily she was comforted. She notices that her spirit companion Azu is also now much happier. She gently smiles and strokes the little bird, catching its joyful mood. Jin and Ash exchanged a quiet, understanding look across the table. The scene changes, a voice sounds, rejoicing, she is feeling better. On the horizon stands a large wooden frame building under a clear blue sky. Jin runs into Let's on the street. He heard that he is returning to the forest. Let's ask Jin to sew him a bag and Jin willingly agrees to take measurements. Jin explains that after making bags for Dean and Chris, he needs more leather. Let's worry such a high-quality bag can attract attention and be stolen. While Jin measures him, we will tell all the details of the upcoming hunt. Jin is surprised. He thought that adventure stars only come from standard requests. Let's clarify, stars are also given for work in the guild and for volunteer help to the community. He thoughtfully thinks that they are just small fish in the ocean of the big world. The diagram shows the adventure rating system, and Jin proudly wears the bronze rank. When Jin heard that bronze ranks can join the expedition, he decisively said he would not participate. While he is being measured, he playfully complains that it tickles, and Jin asks when he is leaving. Jin explains that his departure depends on a person named Amadeo, and it is this name he questions. It turns out Amadeo is a golden rank adventurer, whom the guild covered by calling on his connections for help. He adds that Amadeo is teaming up with a powerful mage, and this instantly interests Jean. We will show the guild's confidence. They believe that Amadeo will easily deal with the few monsters expected. Changing the subject, Jin listens with a curious, almost questioning expression on his face. So we discover that Amadeo claims to see spirits, and this shocks Jean. Under the night sky, shining sparks of light fill the crowns of the demonic forest. Standing in the enchanted forest amid the whispering trees, Jin resolutely decides to hunt monsters to get materials for sewing bags. In the moonlit forest, a small black shadow spirit flashed past him. He grabs the creature. It stiffened and turned into a sphere, which he recognizes as Black 95. Releasing the spirit, he swears to name everyone he finds so that Ash can finally calm down. Alone in the glowing forest, he prepares to undertake his new mission. A new chapter unfolds as a voice suddenly calls Jean on a town street. Jin meets Ash in a note. He sincerely thanks them for waiting for him. He gives them new backpacks and says he had to give those things anyway. Ash notes that time is short, not offers payment, and Jin postpones the answer. Jin explained that his crafting skills made this job much easier than they had imagined. He says that Amadeo decides the start of the expedition, so they better stock up in advance. He recalled Let's warning, dubious types might sneak into the expedition. Two rough men approach him, loudly commenting on his appearance and brazenly demanding money from him. Irritated by their demands, Jean forcefully pushed one of the thugs away. Note anxiously asks if Jean is okay, and a new voice mocks the thug for completely misjudging his target. Chris enters with Dean and seeing the confused Vikes, sharply orders him to be quiet. The traveler noticed that the thugs were foolish for attacking the black bear, and this puzzled Jean. Note suggests everyone celebrate their reunion at a restaurant, an idea that Chris is thrilled about. The group together raises their wooden mugs and makes a cheerful toast. Let's ask what everyone has been doing since the last investigation ended. Vikes explains that all this time he was helping Chris gather herbs, while Dean was on the run. Jean asks Dean what it's like to live on the run and admits that he himself left earlier, not waiting for their request. Chris, a little nervous, asks Dean if he is planning to move from his current residence. Dean explains that his mother now controls his spoiled sister because he pampered her. He decided that his sister should not rely on him while the guild retrains her. Jean sees that Ash is not moved by this drama at all. His mind is only on bear hunting. Jean decides to change the subject and ask about something else. He asks about the nickname Black Bear, embarrassed by what they are talking about. Nod explains that people sometimes confuse Jean and Ash because both are very strong. Jean did not smile. He thought it would suit him better if he were compared to a wolf, like Rish. Chris theatrically exclaims that a bear does not suit her iris-like appearance. Vike slammed his mug, ready to make a passionate confession. He shouts that the true king of wolves is Bamori, and wanting a wolf nickname is madness. Jean asks who Bamori is and Chris replies with a smile. He is a legendary traveler. The note adds that the name Bamori is still well known, and Dean is his great admirer. Vake shares he became an adventurer thanks to Bamori, this amazing Jean. Jean changes the subject again and is already ready to hand out his gifts. He extends the bags he sewed himself for Chris, Dean, and Let's, and they accept them with sincere gratitude. Dean opens the bag and looks with surprise at what he finds inside. He exclaims that there is leather inside too, noting with amazement how incredibly expensive it is. Note offers payment, but Ash, as Jean says, suggests drinking after the expedition. Dean jokingly suggests ordering a whole cow next time, and this completely embarrasses Jean. The whole group agrees to throw a party as soon as everyone returns safe and sound. Jean raises his mug and sincerely wishes everyone a safe journey during their expedition. Vakes and Chris said they are leaving, and Jean's group stayed to keep drinking. Let's tell Jean that he is renting a cheap room near the demon forest. He is outraged that the rent has increased because the landlord installed trendy new toilets. Jean was embarrassed by Let's stare and directly told him to stop. The next day, the note wondered in surprise how they could have tolerated that old smell at all, and Jean couldn't stand it. He asked if they were some kind of traitors. A new day is born, and the sun slowly peeks over the forest-covered mountains. Jean woke up, had breakfast, and decided to go deeper into the forest, using his ability to teleport. He sipped the drink, thoughtfully considering the plan. Today he will go deeper into the forest. In the forest he prepares for another day. He will catch and name the black spirits. Step by step he names the spirits he meets, marking them as black. Sighing with relief, he feels that he is finally starting to cope with the task. He eagerly awaits the passing of the expedition team. He really wants to see how the companion Imadeo will use magic. He asks several local spirits, resembling fairies, to inform him about the progress of the expedition. With a determined look, today he decides to go a little deeper. He looks into the map and notices that it ends at the boundary of God's influence. He steps into an unknown part of the forest, ready to explore. His boots crunch underfoot as he makes his way through the dense forest. Suddenly, a huge boar monster with 3 horns jumps out of the bushes and charges at him. He summons his powerful, all-destroying blade. Fiery energy wraps around his hand. With a sharp and powerful motion, he releases a devastating cutting strike. He casually plans to later prepare a hot pot from the wild boar, using the meat reserves. He noticed several interesting plants nearby. His attention instantly heightened. He recognizes them as wild asparagus shoots and decides to take a few with him. He smiles, imagining sharing the asparagus with Popel in a note. Kneeling down to gather the plants, he felt that someone was watching him. A majestic snow leopard with a unicorn horn peeks out from behind the trees and slowly approaches him. The majestic creature emitted a low, guttural hiss. It carries a torn piece of dark skin in its jaws. Jean flinched and was confused by the sudden appearance of the animal. He cautiously recognizes this creature as a snow leopard. The horned leopard sheds its skin and hisses at him again. He wondered, is this creature trying to tell him something? He understands that the animal is trying to say it wants to ask for a favor. A majestic white deer appears and asks Jean to make a contract with someone named Maisel. Jean is stunned. Another talking animal has appeared. He tries hard to understand why is the leopard holding its tail. He noticed the horn and the absence of black shadows around, and thought it might be a sacred beast. He asks who Maisel is, and the deer calmly replies that Maisel is their friend. Jin concludes that Maisel is about to turn into a black spirit. In exchange for his help, the deer offers to create a shelter for him. Jin explained that this sanctuary will scare away monsters and black spirits. He considers the offer and realizes that a base in the forest will really come in handy to give names to the spirits. He agrees to help, and he is told to sit on the deer's back. He carefully sat on the white deer and announced that he was ready. The deer dashed forward at incredible speed and threw him back. He slammed into its antlers. He clung to the deer and shouted at it not to rush forward while they were rushing through the forest. The young man was harshly thrown to the ground, groaning from nausea. He gets up confused and grumbles because of that sudden sharp stop. Mao the snow leopard hissed, letting Maisel know that they had arrived. A dark, distorted horse appears on the ledge and, glancing at the man, hisses, "What are you doing here?" Rising, the young man recognizes the horse Maisel and the leopard Mao. He approaches, staring into the ominous, shadowy flame on Maisel's shoulder. Announcing his intention to make a contract, he directly asks, "What is the horse's name?" In his thoughts, a rule surfaces. The named spirit must voluntarily speak its name. Maisel snorts with contempt. What fool would make a contract with a human? The horse compares this bond to a noose and resolutely declares that he will not participate in it. The boy swiftly jumped onto the back of the stubborn horse. He aggressively calls the spirit a scoundrel and demands his name without a trace of fear. The deer and Mal note that his methods seem a bit excessive. Maisel fights wildly, calling his rider a vile human. Pressing the rebellious horse to the ground, he repeatedly asked what his name was. Broken, the horse finally croaks his name and the young man offers a deal. Between them hung the idea of making a contract. His hand begins to glow with a gentle light as he prepares the ritual. The contract is signed. He sighs with relief, feeling as if all the magic has been drawn out of him. His animals again mock his overly ambitious plans for the shelter. He paints his vision with words, a picturesque, easily accessible place for spirits where a spring flows. Mao orders him to set off together with the deer to the chosen place. Maisel, now purified, praises the man with sincere admiration for his impressive riding skills. He reluctantly mounts the deer again, dreaming of a more comfortable ride. Without any warning, the deer dashed forward and threw him back over its antlers. During their wild movement, the forest blurs into an indistinct spot. The ride suddenly ends. He is thrown to the ground again. Numb, he gets up and asks where they have arrived. He looks around with admiration at the wonderful grove with white-barked trees. With a grateful blush on his cheeks, he says that this place is better than he had hoped. Two animal spirits announce that they will now set up a sanctuary. Mao hisses and a wave of magical energy flows into the pond. Suddenly, a shimmering protective dome appeared over the entire clearing. Suddenly, he realizes with fear that the barrier will repel ordinary horses. The deer encouragingly says that any of the beasts he made a deal with can still enter. Bidding him farewell, the majestic animals sincerely thank him for his help. In a dazzling flash of light, both spirit beasts completely disappeared. He stands alone in the now quiet magical refuge that he has gained. Unfolding his map, he sees with surprise that a new place has appeared on it. He cannot hide his shock at the new addition. When he last checked, it was not there. He suddenly realizes that he can mark on the map places that even gods usually do not reach. The possibility of finding Japan just like Flora fills him with admiration. With a determined look, he decides what to do next. A new chapter begins in the developed and bustling trading city of Naladade. He came to carefully study every building to later take them as models. The island city is famous for its advanced technologies and craftsmanship. He was immediately impressed by the quality of the glass panes. Using his appraisal skill, he began to scrutinize the construction. He cannot help but notice how transparent this glass is, formed from connected circles. Thick, bubbly green glass he saw in Canaan came to his mind. His attention was suddenly caught by the delicate carvings on the document box. The city's modernity is most vividly told by its luxurious shops. The exquisite red cup enchanted him, and he decided to buy it. He regrets with a heavy heart that his shopping obsession diverted him from architectural studies. He enters the pharmacy filled with curiosity to find out the level of medicine in this world. His gaze falls on a large open box of cocoa beans. The seller explains that these beans are ground into a bitter elixir. He learns that nobles drink it with sweeteners, and because of this, the price soars. The price of the beans was astronomical, and he is simply stunned by it. The price does not stop him. He still decides to buy some for himself. His ability to assess highlights the huge efforts invested in their preparation. He also buys other spices to compare them with those already in his pantry. He was walking and suddenly a voice called to him from behind. An elderly gentleman smiled and enthusiastically spoke about the beauty standing before his eyes. The young man tensed, trying to understand if that man wanted a fight. The gentleman apologizes and asks where he bought his bag. He explains it is a new, convenient design from the Azul region. The man notices that the Azul region is quite far. He describes an exhausting journey through snowy mountains. The gentleman thanked him for the information and left. Already for the 10th time that day, he is asked about the bag. He recalls a grim incident in the bathroom and fervently hopes that the plumbing will be better. Having looked into all the shop windows, he headed towards his main goal. He walks down a quiet alley, ready for the main event of the day. He enters a cluttered shop. The owner raises his eyes and asks, "What are you looking for?" He asks for books about spirits, and the shopkeeper jumped up in surprise. A blond young man overheard and, unable to resist, asked, "Are you looking for a specific book?" The young man Ash notes that such a book is a real rarity. He is convinced if it were found anywhere, it would disprove everything. Ash admits that he himself rummaged through suspicious antique shops in search of that item. The seller shrugged. Such books are usually displayed as decorations in wealthy homes, not read. The boy asks where to find those gloomier bookstores. In the bookstore, the seller hands him books, some full of content and life, others empty like blank sheets. The clerk explains that empty books are simply disguised wooden boxes. He waved off the display copies and asked for real books. The clerk hands over a book with empty pages. The spirit made it completely unreadable. The clerk ironically remarks, the empty book is more expensive. The young man squints and asks to see the book touched by the spirit. A tiny fairy appears and he wonders, does she constantly rewrite the text? As soon as the clerk opens the book, the fairy flaps her wings and flies away from the pages. The clerk quietly explained, this script is special and only the author can read it. He thoughtfully thinks that magicians often keep their secrets under lock and key. To his surprise, language skills allow him to read these symbols. He begins to notice clues hinting that this is part of something bigger and connected. Seeing magical circles, he excitedly asked if there are more books with the same binding. The clerk says there are, but they are more expensive because of the illustrations. He thanks the seller as he leaves the shop. His mission succeeded. He suddenly realizes that spirits guarded the original manuscript itself. Books are a true treasury of history, knowledge about herbs and tales about spirits. Having spent all his money, he finally decides, it's time to go home. In a cozy home, a young man named Gene reads by the warm fireplace. He thoughtfully holds a book about the risks and benefits of contracts with spirits. Gene recalled that the spirits with whom the contract was made make magic much more effective and reliable. He considers how costly it will be for him to summon a spirit in a hostile environment. Suddenly it occurs to him that spirits are completely different, not the same. He imagines Mistu and Halalfa as two completely different spirits of light. His thoughts drift to another sphere of light, the one he considers uncontrollable and dangerous. Gene understood spirits will not help those who harm nature. A new day blooms under a bright, sunny sky. A luxurious hot breakfast is served: sausages, cutlets, and pancakes. A young blonde named Ash savors the dish with pure, blissful pleasure. Ash and his elderly butler enthusiastically praise how delicious this hot dish is. Jin explained he invited them to eat something that could spoil quickly before the trip. The note emphasizes hot breakfasts in their world are a real rarity. Jean asks if they ever cook hot food in the morning. The butler, as if revealing a secret, explains that people save on firewood by buying it at stalls. An empty bowl is a sign that the breakfast was very tasty and completely satisfying. When his guests are already about to leave, Jean asks them to wait a little longer. Ash and Not look on with curiosity, wondering what he has in mind. He extends a large, tightly wrapped lunch so they can share it with their comrades. With sincere gratitude, they wave goodbye and set off on their way. Left alone, Jin said he was going to stock up on building materials. He enters the building materials store, scrutinizes the tiles, and buys bricks. The seller smiles and helps him purchase various building materials. Jin excitedly tells his dog-like companion Rich about the new safe zone. Several small winged spirits, resembling dogs, playfully circle around Jin's feet. Holding Rich, he activates his teleportation ability and teleports them away. His boots softly touch the grassy, sunlit clearing in the forest. He immediately shuddered as the small, fluffy spirits scattered in panic. He aloud asks himself if it was because Rich was here that they had to flee. Raising a barrier, Gene tells his partner that it is safe to play here. He announced that he is starting to set up the plot and immediately took materials from his magical storage. Focused, he thrusts the shovel into the ground to begin. In the sun-dappled clearing, the young man begins to dig, deciding to build a two-story house. He imagines a simple plan, one room on each floor perfect for tea and relaxation. Gently stroking his faithful friend, he dreams of a spacious yard where they could be together while he gives names to the spirits. Having spent several days gathering plaster, wood, and bricks, he feels completely ready to start construction. After hard work, he leaned on the shovel, sighed heavily from fatigue, and decided to take a lunch break. He called his little dog-like companion Rich, and he happily trotted over to join. With ears wide open, Rich greedily licked the water from the bowl placed for him. A thick bagel sandwich, generously filled with meat and greens, lies ready on a piece of parchment. The young man enjoys the quiet meal at a small table, while Rich rests at his feet. After drinking, Rich notices a small stick on the ground and examines it with curiosity. He happily chews the stick and rolls onto his back in the grass, bathing in pure delight. Watching his favorite pet, the man dreams of planting various plants and buying a coffee siphon. A sudden hissing made him flinch, and he saw a majestic horned snow leopard emerging from the trees. He is increasingly amazed when right behind the leopard, a graceful white deer with huge antlers appears. A powerful dark horse steps into the clearing, completing the trio of unexpected visitors. Three creatures ignore him, their gaze is fixed on Rish, who hisses defensively. Confusion reigned in the snow leopard's mind. Why is the revered Rishasama here? The young man, completely bewildered by the animal's respectful tone, asks what is happening. The majestic spirit beast stood before Rish, and the horse asked why Rish-sama ended up here. The boy repeated the respectful address, Risha-sama. Now he has even more questions in his mind. The deer and the snow leopard whisper, and the truth is revealed. Rish disappeared 5 years ago after failing to summon the hero. Hand on chin, the boy listens carefully and contemplates this new information. He turns to his beast and asks if he was ever the master of these mighty creatures. Rich tilts his head, looking empty and questioning, still with a stick in his mouth. The man gazes into Risey's eyes, thinking that he either does not remember, will not recall, or simply does not care. He is struck by the realization. He is shocked that they even knew each other. Gazing at the sparkling magical glade, he wonders if this is Rish's former home. He concludes the wolf truly belongs in the forest. The animal begins to praise with a hiss, proclaiming that Risha-sama is stronger than any other spirit. Someone else adds, his reach is also freer than that of any other spirit that exists. The praise does not cease. They are convinced that his mighty voice can reach every corner of the world. As the snow leopard purrs with admiration, a man named Riley notices. He must be a huge fan. The deer, with a catch in his voice, told how Rish defended the forest from the Apostles of the Wind, and the man quietly decided to keep working. The young man asks about the Apostles of the Wind, but the horned snow leopard only hisses. Meanwhile, the animal spirits look admiringly at Rish, who is chewing a stick, and call his appearance majestic. One spirit whispers that all traces of Reach disappeared about a year ago. Jean suddenly realized it was then that he brought Rish to his house, cut off by magic. He wonders, could it be because Rish saved this forest that this land has such strange geography? Turning to the spirits, he asks again, who are these Apostles of the Wind? The deer admits that he was once the previous hero, and the snow leopard begins to cry. With horror, Jin asks himself if every hero of the past was a terrible person. The spirits explain the hero's plan was to conquer the forest and build boats. He realizes that it is about boats, and his heart aches with guilt over his own actions. He fears that Rich will now begin to hate him for having done something similar. Squatting down depressed, he meets Risha's innocently curious gaze. Calmed, he gently scratches Risha's belly while the little creature playfully rolls over. The animal spirits sadly reported that the western forests never recovered after the destruction caused by the hero. Jin reflects on how human settlements are forced to cut pieces of nature to expand. He understands that beyond the cities lurks a dangerous world of spirits and beasts. He thinks about how people short-sightedly cut down forests, unaware of the long-term dangers. The horse recalls how the magic of the current hero spoiled his once pure white body. It is sincerely and deeply grateful that it was spared from pain. It did not have to eat its own. Other spirits coldly reminded the horse that it was they who arranged this deal on the lands of Risha. Like a wave, a female voice emerges in memory, warning of treachery in the world. She said that even spirits devour others and warned him, beware of mighty heroes. The Jin whispers to himself that he will never approach them. His determination hardens. He regrets nothing but knows he must become stronger. He suddenly realizes the divine gifts of craft are not enough. He must learn to fight. He anxiously asks another spirit, did Rich lose his memory along with his power? Looking at the map, he assumes that Risha's influence on these forests is now weak. The horse and the snow leopard begin to share what they know about reachability. The deer proclaims that Risha-sama is greater, braver, and wiser than any other spirit. Overwhelmed by their intrusive flattery, Jean begs them to stop. The scene changes before us, opens a view of one of his magnificent multi-story buildings. Jin sits before an appetizing dish, pressing his hands in gratitude. Biting off a large piece of noodles, he savors every bite and exclaims, delicious. Jin enjoys the food and plans to start a farm so that new vegetables become common. While eating, Jin pondered, should he try to breed new crop varieties with the help of local spirits? He dreams that someday his unique ingredients will adorn plates in exquisite restaurants. Filled with gratitude for the teaching, he resolutely sets about implementing his grand plans. The moon hangs over the quiet mountain landscape and seems to whisper that the night will be peaceful. Under the stars, he begins construction. A heavy sledgehammer breaks stones under his blows. He kneels down and carefully prepares the dark soil for planting. In the enchanted forest, he gently lures a small shadow spirit to sit on his finger. Walking through the newly planted field, he smiles thinking about his achievements. With a satisfied smile, he counts new cultures to himself and delights in his work. The hand sharply stretches forward, and a voice solemnly announces what powers are about to be granted. Kato lists a long series of abilities, from freedom and separation to the shocking skill of killing heroes. Jin agreed but inwardly doubted his ability to kill heroes after all. He had explicitly asked not to interfere. Another close-up of the hand and you feel, the gods are extending a true gift. Kato shows the sword a vital tool for survival, which he calls the killing blade and which can cut through almost anything. Goddess Van steps forward, holding a pouch in her hands and says that it will be needed where he is going. In the pouch was a powder that helps plants grow. Jin takes it and sincerely thanks her. Kato sincerely thanks Jin for keeping calm, and a quiet bark is heard. A small wolf-like creature stretches and lightly trembles while the final preparations are made. He asks hopefully, can he take the puppy with him? The young man thinks that Rich, having no strength, can only give himself. He gently asks the small wolf-like creature to go on the journey with him. In response, Rich gently seals their new agreement with a quiet, contented bark. Van the goddess gives him the last gift, transportation to a safe refuge. Arriving at the majestic estate, he promised himself to live a quiet and cozy life. Casting a glance at the new surroundings, he froze in admiration of what he saw. Before his eyes opens a spacious, beautiful landscape, rolling hills and a distant village on the horizon. He admiringly enjoys the beautiful views and wonders why it is so warm here. Walking to his new home, he thinks, this looks more like a mansion. In the mirror, he sees a shocking, unfamiliar face. He does not believe his eyes. His appearance has suddenly and unexpectedly changed. Confused, he feels like the son of God and thanks them. The entrance door creaks open and he enters his new home. In the spacious vestibule, he quietly utters a sound of admiration. In the well-furnished living room stands a plush armchair right in front of the fireplace. His tour continues further into the kitchen with a brick stove and dishes. Standing in another large room, he says enthusiastically how spacious this house is. He continues to examine this impressive dwelling. He discovers a huge pantry, a food storage that will never be empty. Surrounded by endless supplies, he feels as if he is living in a dream. To his surprise, he finds a large bathtub with live salmon and feels pity. He is troubled by the thought, could the water in the bathtub somehow be connected to his former home, Japan? The sight of fresh fish instantly ignited hunger in him after the boring, monotonous food on the island. Seeing dirty hands, he wisely decides to wash them before eating. He sighs deeply with satisfaction and immerses himself in the hot bath. Submerged in water, he reflects on what pure happiness it is, a real bath. A practical idea suddenly occurs to him, how to polish rice with his new skills. Now dressed, he stands before a wooden rice polishing machine, ready to try. His eyes narrow, he activates the ability to evaluate in order to understand it. The skill instantly reveals the mechanism of the machine, captivating him with incredible clarity. Soon the rice in the traditional wooden vessel begins to boil and emit white steam. Nearby in a woven basket, his little friend Rich is sleeping sweetly. He is determined to strengthen the forces and protection that Rich gave him. Sitting by the basket, he promised to give Rich meat when he feels better. In the kitchen, he begins rhythmically chopping cabbage into thin, almost transparent strips. He generously sprinkles a thick piece of beef tenderloin with spices from the grinder. The seasoned steak sizzles loudly as it touches the hot, oil-greased pan. The combination seems strange to him, but he still decides to cook it. A sharp, pungent smell of fish and crabs lingers in the kitchen. He opens the container and before him appears a portion of warm, fluffy white rice. The prepared dish was served so beautifully that it simply sparkles with flavor. He brings his hands together and quietly thanks for the food. His thoughts fly to friends on an expedition, and now he is completely calm. He calls his friend Rish, inviting him to play with the toy on a string. Jin joyfully throws the toy, and Rich rushes after it with pure delight. Rish proudly returns with the toy, and Jin praises him as a good boy. Stroking his companion, he wondered whether to ask Danos to make a frisbee. He announces that the games are over today. He has a new project to try. On his writing desk are laid out tools for magical work. Everything is ready for action. Leaning over the parchment, he whispered with fervent desire that he wants to create magical circles. He carefully prepares special ink, mixing ingredients with his own magic. Holding a compass in his hand, he prepares for the delicate and precise work ahead. He carefully applies the freshly made enchanted ink to the tip of the compass. With a steady hand, he began tracing the delicate figures from his book. He holds his breath and concentrates, knowing he must combine these figures with other magical symbols. For a moment he freezes in thought, deciding which spirit to summon. His imagination conjures a gelatinous water spirit and a winged earth fairy. Suddenly, a fiery salamander spirit flashes through his mind, another possibility for summoning. He becomes confused and angrily scolds the spirits for appearing before he finished. He drives away these chaotic elementals, worried they will ruin the fragile parchment. Overwhelmed by the commotion, he stands still, hesitating about what to do next. Suddenly, another idea occurs to him to summon an ice spirit instead. His thoughts are instantly interrupted when Rish playfully jumps into his arms and licks him. Suddenly, it dawns on him. He remembers that Rish possesses the powers of ice and darkness. He imagines how someday he will make ice cream if Rish can help cool everything down. Shaking his head, he gathered his thoughts and decided that it was time to return to drawing. The field is already sown, and he sends a sincere wish for a bountiful harvest this season. He loudly announces his final decision to draw the symbol of fertility and infuse it with his magic. The completed magic circle shone brightly as he poured his power into it. When the incantation ended, a large cloud of smoke burst from the parchment. He froze in shock. Suddenly, an old woman in a hood appeared before him. Magical sparks of light dance in the air around the newly summoned spirit. The woman smiles and he immediately understands. She is the spirit of the bountiful harvest. He mutters that although this is understandable, the situation still throws him off balance. His mind races, is this a joke or is it a real, successful summoning? He realized that the magical ink he had so carefully made turned out to be pathetic. Suddenly a hand appears behind him, decisively pointing at his magical work. Vaughn appears, calmly gazing at the glowing parchment on the table before him. He gently touches the magical circle with his palm. Jean looks with surprise as the intricate drawing suddenly completely disappears from the paper. Rudiel and Kato correct him, explaining that this book is for the spirits with whom a contract has been made and who are nearby. In the quiet room above their heads, a soft, smiling laughter sounds. The goddess Hal Alpha easily descends and tells Jean that it seems he is having fun. With a radiant smile, she adds that watching him brings her great joy. The Jinn throws his hands up, irritated by their sudden appearance without any warning. Hal Alpha places her hand on his shoulder, noticing the wonderful spirits he has gathered. She says that it is these fleeting spirits that make the home so cozy. All the gods have now gathered around his work desk. Ish asks the question, why does Jean bother with books when he can just ask them directly? Jean was tormented by shame in his soul, remembering how they left him on his own. Vaughn suggested arranging a sparring match to shake off the boredom from just sitting around. The scene shifts deep into the forest to a clearing dotted with patches of sunlight. Vaughn and Jean stand opposite each other, swords at the ready. The duel is about to begin. They lunged forward, and their blades clashed in a powerful, instantaneous collision. With a determined expression on his face, Jean puts all his strength into the fight. He charged forward with a shout, putting all his power into the attack. Vaughn easily parries the strike. A sharp, loud clang of steel rings out. The force of the parry pushes Jean back. He stumbles and falls to the ground. Vaughn looks down at him and bluntly says that Jean is moving incorrectly. Still lying on the ground, embarrassed, Jean asks what exactly he means by his assessment. In a flashback, Jean suddenly realizes that all this time he has only been imitating others' styles. He remembers how, in an attempt to become stronger, he copied various combat techniques. Vaughn explicitly tells him that his movements are uncontrolled and a complete mess. Jin reluctantly admits, the assessment is correct. He knows he did not adjust his movements. Vaughn says asks Jean to imagine the true and intended shape of his sword. Jin closed his eyes and thoughtfully pictured that scene. In his mind, fantasy heroes flickered, then samurai from historical dramas appeared. He realized that historical dramas affected him much more strongly. He looks at his luxuriously decorated blade, and involuntarily thinks this is more like a sword from some RPG. Suddenly he understands something decisive. The sword is actually completely different. Vaughn clenches the sword. It begins to crumble into particles of sparkling light. Jin stared, not believing his eyes. His sword miraculously begins to transform. He froze and watched as the deadly blade began to take on a completely new form. His eyes widened as he recognized the new weapon taking shape. He exclaims with surprise, it has transformed into a Japanese katana. The new weapon slowly floats into his hands, shimmering with a faint magical light. He notices fantasy changes, instead of fabric a silver chain. Holding the hilt, he proudly says that this is a sword from his homeland. He prepares to draw the blade. A pleasant, ringing click is heard. He takes a ready stance, the very one katana held before him horizontally. With one quick and smooth motion, he draws the blade, fully ready for battle. Vaughn throws a question as if testing, is he ready for another round of their sparring? Jean's face lit up with impatience as he eagerly accepted the challenge. The second duel exploded with a sharp and instant clash of their steel blades. Vaughn skillfully parries Jean's attack, and they merge into a blurred, furious whirl of movement. Jean finds it much easier to move with the katana. He truly enjoys the fight. She praises Jean for his progress, and Jean clearly shines from this praise. He bitterly realizes the all-destroying blade is powerless to harm its creator. He is serious, thoughtfully looking at the incredible strength of his mentor. He feels that Vaughn's advice allowed him to fight without any hesitation. Rich ran up to him and gently licked his cheek with joy. Suddenly, the goddesses Mistu and Halalfa appear, smiling, and sincerely congratulate him on his hard work. The two goddesses coquettishly tease him, as if to say how pleasant it is to be surrounded by so many beauties. Holding his little friend in his arms, Jin realized that this book is built on false assumptions. He is given a new mission. Within 7 days, he must visit the temple in Telmesti. The young man learns Stelmist is an island south of the Kavala Peninsula. The female figure promises to prepare a more accurate book, and he gratefully agrees. He sighs, realizing that he must earn money to buy the book. Suddenly, an old woman in a hood appears. She looks with interest at the impressive number of crops he has planted. The rows of magical plants barely flickers in the freshly plowed soil of his new garden. The boy and the old woman sincerely offer to help harvest in exchange for some food. The Jinn asks embarrassedly, why do spirits need to eat at all? They honestly say that they try everything that interests them, for example, his unusual crops. He understands that their tastes have changed. Instead of simple products, they now choose the harvest from his vegetable garden. The search for money leads him to the bustling trading city of Naladade. Above the door of one of the city's numerous establishments, a refined signboard is displayed. He savors a meal in an open-air restaurant, admiring the view of the sea. Tasting truffle pasta, he looks with admiration at the many different delicacies of this city. He smiles to himself, recalling how successfully he sold the fox's pelt and horns for a considerable sum. Now that his finances are secure, he calmly continues to enjoy his delicious meal. A thought surfaced in his mind to find a training sword, just like his deadly blade. The shopkeeper warmly greeted him and, winking, said that they also sell rare spirit weapons here. He learns this is a weapon mastered by spirits, or spirits that transform into weapons. This new information makes him realize that his own blade, All-Kill, is actually a spirit weapon. The shopkeeper advises keeping them in places loved by spirits, which prompts him to reconsider his storage method. Having received valuable advice, he sincerely thanks the seller and sets off. That evening, he returns home to prepare for his nightly ritual. On his table stands a basin of water prepared for a divination spell. Standing before the bowl, he focuses intently to peer into distant events. His reflection distorts as the magic of divination swirls in the water. The image clears, and an expedition team appears on the screen, part of his daily check. Sipping tea, he recognizes the group. It's the Golden Party led by Amadeo. He admits that he calls upon local spirits for help to see more clearly. While having a snack, he catches sight of Amadeo, as they said, surrounded by women. His sharp senses instantly detect all three adventurers carry spirits with them. He recognized the mage's companion in a robe, a spirit of light. The bow wrapped in vine immediately reveals her. She is a user of spirit weapons. Finally, with a stone-faced expression, he dryly notes that Amadeo's familiar is a prairie dog. In his clairvoyance, a wiggling little bottom of some creature flashed for a moment, and he found it incredibly cute. Then he decides to visit and see how Ash and the rest of his friends are doing. The magical vision shows Ash's team. They are still moving together, in a group of 5. Among them, he recognizes Ozza, Dean's spirit, and the one obsessed with chins. He remembers that for their safety, he left one of his spirits nearby. To his horror, he sees his spirit, like a fairy, gently tending to Letz's beard. He worries that his spirit might develop strange habits, and all this will happen without Letz's knowledge. Changing the subject, he wondered how the Golden Rank Party was doing. Divination shows that they are now fighting a huge lizard. With one powerful strike, Amadeo cut the huge lizard in half. The sorceress, in a robe and her spirit like an elf, watched the display of power in fascination. The lizard-like monster cut in half lies defeated on the mossy forest floor. Jin froze in surprise. Could this incredible power come from their spirits? Suddenly his gaze stops on a solitary figure, and something tightens in his chest with anxiety. Tension fell as the frame shifted to this new, ominous figure. The man in heavy armor quietly sneaked up on the archer, his hand gripping the sword hilt tightly. The sound made the archer suddenly turn exactly at the moment he was lowering his sword. The blurred whirl of movement captures the air. A sudden, brutal clash begins. The archer dodged the attack and swiftly plunged a dagger into the attacker's side. He is captivated by her skill. No wonder she holds the golden rank. The armored man recoils backward, clutching the wound in his side. From the wound on his chest, a grotesque black spirit begins to emerge. The possessed man collapses to the ground as the spirit fully exits. The released spirit instantly lunges at the archer, seeking a new host. But it is sharply repelled by an invisible force surrounding the archer. The spirit immediately returns and flies back into the body of its previous host, who is now unconscious. Jean deeply contemplates why the first possession happened. He knows spirits need a carrier. He wonders what the archer will do now to deal with the black spirit. Looking at her, he feels a terrible suspicion slowly forming in his mind. He does not know how it is even possible to defeat the spirit that has possessed a person. He knows the spirit's weapon could work, but not when its master is a human. The archer draws her bow woven from the spirit, her face stern and resolute. He watches in horror as she aims at the leader, realizing her cruel intent. A shocking scene reflects in his eye. Black blood spurts from the wound. The memory of the execution makes him tremble. He shakes from the proximity of death. He sharply struck himself in the face to break free from the swirling thoughts. Taking a deep breath, he finally gathered himself a little. He recalls that wounding the host is a known way to harm the spirit as well. He wonders why she did not attack the spirit when it became vulnerable for a moment. In his imagination appears another adventurer, a comrade rushing to the fallen man. The man holds the dead comrade to his chest, his face a mask of grief and horror. Jin, with a gloomy look, understands that the man was his friend. From the chest of the sorrowful man, a black spirit begins to emerge. The spirit is now trying to possess the second man, seeking a new body for itself. The archer and the recently struck man stood and looked confusedly at his sudden fall. He is firmly convinced the archer does not see black spirits. He assumes that the ability to see spirits may manifest differently. Perhaps they are visible only as a blurred silhouette, or only certain types or levels of spirits are noticeable. He understands, for the first time he sees a spirit directly possessing someone. He thinks that this bulge appeared because the possession is just beginning. He absent-mindedly wonders if the other 2 golds in the team see them. He remembers how Let's said that it is difficult to see a spirit that has possessed someone. He thinks if they could see it, the man would immediately be put in quarantine. At first, he did not feel obligated to solve this problem after all. He had already learned a lot. But just the thought of Ash and his other friends nearby makes him reconsider. Caring for his friend's safety, he resolutely said that he had already decided. Returning to the room, he calls upon his spirits of light and shadow for help. He commands them to immerse his face in shadow and lift him above the ground. He adds the final instruction that the cloak should not rise along with his body. He stands transformed, a mysterious figure in a hood, silently hovering in the room. With a determined smile, he says, "It's time to set off." At the scene, Amadeo demands to know what just happened between his comrades. The archer, puzzled, says that his companion simply suddenly collapsed without any warning. The voice of the mysterious figure cut through their confusion and instantly drew attention. The adventurers sharply turned around, alarmed by his sudden and silent appearance. Hiding under a dark hood, Jin felt confident no one would recognize him anyway. His confidence shattered into pieces when he noticed his comrades among the spectators, Ash and others. Surrounded by flickering sparks of light, he silently asks the spirits to change his voice. He addressed the possessed man and stated directly, he came for the creature hiding inside him. The tormented man stammers in confusion as the cloaked figure approaches with an outstretched hand. He himself could not believe his eyes. The mysterious figure's hand seemed to pass through his chest. Jin brushed off the strange sensation, telling himself it was just imagination. With a sharp, decisive movement, he tears the shadow creature from the man's body. Nearby, a traveler shouted, recognizing the creature writhing like a black spirit. The long-haired adventurer recalls that the possessed man had behaved strangely even before his sudden collapse. The woman in the hood, with growing horror, realizes the man was probably possessed. Finally free, the man stunnedly surveys the surrounding world, while Jean silently watches him. Jean's attention was drawn to another victim, and he suddenly realized that the archer's target was still alive. He kneels beside the severely wounded man, his face calm amid the soft lights that float around. Placing his hands on the wound, he unleashes his powerful healing energy. The wounded man let out a painful groan, and his face twisted as the magic began to take effect. His eyelids tremble, his eyes open, and he slowly regains consciousness after the miraculous healing. The blonde-haired man looks on with distrust and exclaims that the man has now awakened. The whole group froze as the healed man stood up and called it a miracle. Under the shadow of the hood, Jean quietly smiles with relief he succeeded. One of the adventurers whispered in disbelief, unable to comprehend this impossible recovery. The hooded woman leaned over Jean, her face tense. She demanded to know who he really was. Her sharp gaze fell on the flickering lights around him, as if asking what spirits those were. He reflects on how strange it is to have pacts with spirits and how much they help today. The Jinn confirms to himself that the woman truly sees the spirits surrounding him. The woman admits that she does not know where this spirit, which he just pulled out, comes from. She sternly warns him, watch closely for the first bearer. The Jinn turns and sees Ash looking at him with a creepily tense, piercing gaze. Ash's piercing gaze frightened him. He realized he must leave immediately before he is recognized. Another adventurer calls out to him, wait, but his escape is already underway. Activating the teleportation skill, his body began to scatter into particles of light. He disappears completely, leaving behind only flickering sparks of light and a quiet sound. Appearing in another place, he held the captured black spirit and felt that everything was settled. He notices that before him is the largest black spirit he has ever seen, and without hesitation decides to make a contract with it. He remembered the huge possessed horse, which, although distorted, still somewhat manages to restrain itself. The diagram shows how black spirits devour others to fill their missing parts. The frame is filled with hissing and static. This is a sign that time or thought has suddenly changed. The text says that the contract or the master can quell the insatiable hunger of the black spirit. He thinks about how he always restrains his spirits, with whom he made a contract so that they do not devour each other. A small spirit resembling a bat happily flutters its wings, preparing to return home. Under the starry sky, he finally decides, it is time to return home. Returning home, his spirit companions sincerely thank him for the help and ask to be dispersed. Alone, he wonders what has happened in the world during his absence. Leaning over the divination bowl, he intently gazes into the whirlpool of water to see what is happening far away. He sees how the adventurers he saved now kneel before the archer who attacked them. He smiles slyly. He finds it funny that they bow to the same person who almost killed their comrade. He convinces himself that the companions of the possessed were the first to attack the archer. He is eager to ask Esh and others for the full story as soon as they return to Canaan. The scene shifts to another time. We find ourselves in the yard near a sturdy stone house. A young man named Denoso shouts in panic, "What is happening to me?" Jean sharply ordered Denoso to be silent and take off his clothes, ignoring his protests. Two boys peek from around the corner and ask if they can join the fun. Jean casually agrees and asks the boys to help him with this task. The two boys glow with mischievous delight, and this fills Denoso with complete horror. Denoso's clothes tore with a triumphant sound. Shiva receives the clothes and with pleasant surprise notices their amazingly good quality. She talks about the day's affairs, and Jean sternly orders her to make Denoso also get himself in order. The shirtless dinosaur loudly complains that he was attacked by a group so early in the morning. Shiva winks and promises to make sure he washes thoroughly by the well. Jean waved goodbye, leaving Denoso alone with his fate, while Shiva drags him away. He states that today he came to the Denoso house with a certain purpose. He recalls how he studied the local construction, and it was then that he realized how unhygienic it was there. He notices the raised thresholds in the doors, a common detail to keep street dirt out of the house. His face twists with disgust at the very thought of having to clean the streets of horse manure. His eyes catch the modest bedding of the Denoso family, a simple piece of fabric on a straw mattress. Leaning on a broom, he thinks of one thing to help friends stay clean. He sweeps the stone path because he believes that the Denosos are the cleanest farmers in the district. The sun sets behind the trees, the end of a long day of hard work. Denoso stood in his sparkling clean house looking around and asked, "Jean, some kind of wonder cleaner?" Jean accepts the praise with a smile and says that now only the shutters remain to be fixed. He promises to fix them tomorrow and invites the family for tea. Shiva sends the children to bring a quail and some eggs for food. The children happily agree, raising their hands in an excited impulse. Denoso asks why Jean is cleaning if he does not like it, and Jean confirms that he really does not. He says he came on a whim because he cannot stand dirty places. Shiva simply explains to Denoso her motives, saying that Jean just likes it when everything is clean. She serves an impressive dish, baked quail in a rich sauce. Jean admiringly admires Shiva's signature dish, a pot pho with quails and leeks. The description whispers that the dish was flavored with a sweet, partially fermented liqueur. Using his skill to evaluate, Jean notices how well the leeks absorb the flavor. Shiva, with a warm smile, calls everyone, "It's time to start eating." The family and Jean thank for the food, a truly warm picture of home comfort. Jean dreamily thinks that the Denoso family is his ideal, and he hopes to have the same someday. A sad, dreamy thought ran through his mind about helping his family find such warmth. He quickly dismissed this idea as ridiculous and continued eating. The action shifts to the seaside town of Telmist, where stone houses stand right by the sea. Jean decided to first visit the temple, and then set out to search the city for famous lace and silver items. He asks aloud where to find the temple dedicated to the goddess Rudiel. The impressive stone facade of the temple emerges against the bright sky. Inside, an old priest with a white beard comes out to meet him. The priest confirms that someone told him to wait for Jean's arrival. Closing his eyes, the priest whispered that he sees Jean has also received a prophecy. Jean looks confused, doubt on his face, questions the very idea of prophecy. He recalls how Rudiel spoke to him directly and thinks isn't that a prophecy. In a flash of memory, the moment when the goddess Rudiel handed him a book was shown. Jean admits to the priest, "In some ways you are right." The priest, satisfied, gestures for Jean to follow him deeper into the temple. Their footsteps echo loudly on the stone floor as they walk down the long corridor. Jean raised his head, a silent surprise froze on his face as they stopped. The priest turns with a stone, serious face and whispers that he must not mention a word about what he is about to see. The scene unfolds on an empty white transition frame. The young man with dark, tousled hair firmly gives his promise. The stooped priest turns to the stone wall, ready to move on. His palm touches the wall, and a hidden magical mechanism comes to life. Next to the giant stone statue, a secret passage opens with a rumble. From the darkness emerges the flickering light of a single candle. From beyond the darkness emerges a small figure in a cloak, face hidden in shadow. Jean gasped at the sudden appearance. He even shuddered. The figure was so much like someone named Rudiel. The young man froze, looking puzzled at the mysterious figure in the robe. The figure turned around and looked at him with a calm, steady gaze. He decides to approach closer. He must examine to understand what is happening here. His keen gaze noticed something strange in the candle flame. Suddenly he realizes that light is not fire but only an illusion of tiny spirits. This leads him to the conclusion that before him is a true mighty spirit. The spirit turned and silently walked away. The djinn hesitates for a moment whether he should follow them. He walks down a long stone corridor glowing with magical light. Only the thought of exploring the secret zone ignites true excitement in him. The passage opens into an endless library with incredibly tall shelves. His spirit guide correctly guesses he is looking for books about summoning. Jean confirms this and immediately shows lively interest in the history of the library. The spirit summons a book from the highest shelf with a single light gesture. A volume that looks ancient is brought to Jean. His guide explains that this book will help him navigate the collection. Later, they find themselves in a simple room inside the library. The room has almost no furniture, only a cabinet and a writing desk. The spirit patiently waits while Jean prepares to begin his research. Before opening the book, he asks if the tour is already over. The pages rustle as he begins to read the history of the library. The book tells how Rudiel saved the collection from destruction. Jean realizes that the spirit's guardian must be connected to Rudiel. He sits at the desk, immersed in the ancient text. The spirit, as if sensing his next question, already extends another book. Jin aloud wonders how powerful the forces of the people of love can be. The spirit hands him a book, a story about love. He gratefully accepts the book, surprised at how ready the spirit was to help. He sits down and begins to read about the history of Locke. The book opens with an impressive illustration of the founder of the Boss Nation. He learns that love was a strong nation, it was guarded by spirits. Their downfall prompted the survivors to crown a new queen. Jin finally learns that the original kingdom of Lo and the royal dynasty fell. He closed the book after finishing the tragic story. The text clearly reveals the difference between two separate groups of lovers. He wonders if some secret community is hidden behind those past events. He felt the true grandeur of this library and had already decided to definitely return. The scene shifts outside to the majestic stone building. Jean is reading outside and suddenly hears a sound. He raises his head and sees a familiar person who has just appeared, surprised. The blonde, whose name is Ash, angrily shouts his name. Jean is puzzled by Ash's appearance. She looks noticeably exhausted from the journey. He notices that Ash's hair is wet and asks with a smile if he has just bathed. The little bird on Ash's shoulder also looks wet and sad. Jean offers to boil some water to arrange a real bath. Ash says he was so dirty and ashamed that he did not dare to ask. Jean smiles, understanding Ash's peculiar nature. He sympathizes, recalling how easy it is to get covered in dirt during expeditions. Esha is being asked where his butler is. Jean suggests brewing tea while the bath water is boiling. He pours steaming tea from a white teapot into a cup. He hands Esha the tea and a basket with bread. Esha shyly asks him to keep his distance, worried that he smells unpleasant. Jean agrees and suddenly remembers he has something for him. Escher extends a small cloth bundle as a gift. Jean accepts the pouch and curiously asks what is inside. Esha shows it is magical iron from which a stronger sword is forged. Jean accepts the valuable and expensive gift with a happy smile. Then Esha curiously asks Jean how his time in the forest went. Jean chokes on his tea from Esha's shocking confession. Panic covers him. What if Ash saw his face through the mantle? Ash remembered the kindness of that one in the robe and his spirit companions. Jin sighed with relief. Ash saw only kindness in him. Ash notices that the figure has no dominant magical element. Jin suddenly realized that the spirits had successfully concealed his identity. Ash's story takes a sinister turn. A possessed man is mentioned. Jin learns that neither Ash nor Not could see the black spirit. In the memory, a possessed man and a golden rank sorceress emerge. Jin wonders how this possession could have happened so easily. Ash explains that the most likely cause is the war in Chaldea. Due to the conflict and the use of magic, many black spirits emerged into the world. Jin asks if they did not expect collateral damage from them. He asks himself with disgust whether these leaders of Chaldea are idiots. Ash gloomily predicts that this year there will be a poor harvest in Chaldea. Ash discovers that the sorceress Rosa is looking for a descendant of love. The scene shifts to a domestic setting as the butler brings firewood. The butler perfectly complements the modern and luxurious amenities of the genies. Jin admires a piece of soap with the scent of cleanliness enthusiastically and plans to bake. He hesitates about what to choose, a meat pie or airy cassella pancakes. In memory, a scene appears before his eyes. The butler and the sorceress talk about love. The butler thinks probably the kingdom wants love as a countermeasure. He believes that their meeting with Jean was pure luck. Jin rejects their theory and intends to avoid the guild. The butler agreed. He was afraid he would have to awkwardly ask Ash for help. Jin believes that Ash will rescue him and help avoid this difficult situation. He was about to reveal the truth for a moment, but immediately dismissed the thought too troublesome. He refocuses on preparing the pastry again. Jin carefully folded the fluffy meringue into the dough so as not to destroy its lightness. A tiny spirit fairy magically stirs the dough in the pan. He carefully places the pan into the hot oven so it cooks slowly. Ash peeks into the kitchen, attracted by the sweet aroma. With a slight blush on his cheeks, Ash inquisitively asks what Jin is doing. Standing by the brick oven, Jin smiles and says he is making cassella pancakes and a meat pie. Ash's eyes shine with pure joy at the thought that he is about to eat cassella pancakes. The scene shifts. Outside here is a sturdy stone building with a noticeable wooden frame. Jin proudly serves a luxurious freshly baked meat pie and a golden pancake. And Ash and the butler, by the way, look at the wonderful food with wide-open eyes of admiration. Taking a gentle bite, Ash exclaimed with delight that the food was simply incredibly tasty when surrounded by roses. The group of travelers cheerfully raises their wooden mugs and shouts a festive toast. After the expedition, the group finally gathers for lunch, and a huge banquet is laid out before them. The travelers settle around the large wooden table and begin eating together. A mighty man named Vakes loudly said, "With good beef you can never go wrong." Chris and his friends happily savor the freshly roasted meat after the exhausting journey. Jin smiles and notices that his companions still ordered a bunch of meat. Ash thoughtfully asks himself if the tavern serves meat pies, still thinking about Jeans. Vakes recalls the moment when during the expedition they encountered a dangerous demonic wolf. In the illustration, the sinister wolf explains that in the eyes of demonic monsters there is a dark veil. He warns if the hay spreads out, the monster will become an even stronger demon. Chris assumes that the guild anticipated this and appointed 3 adventurers of the gold rank. Jean was stunned to learn that the sorceress Rosa also has a gold rank. Chris looks at Jean with a knowing smile, and this confuses Jean. He jokingly teases "Oh, evening twilight," calling him a beast for that insatiable appetite. Let's link the appearance of monsters with the excessive use of magic in Galdia and the hero summoning rituals. A gloomy realization settled on Jean. It seems the arrival of a hero brings war. The secret is revealed. The traveler Amadeo has conceived a new great expedition. He asks the lackey take note whether Amadeo invited him to join the ranks. The note explained that he refused the offer because his character simply did not get along with Amadeo. Chris posed coquettishly and said with a smile that he could not refuse the request of a beautiful person. So let's turn to Ash. He quietly admits that he also declined the invitation. Note slightly knowingly nods his head, observing their conversation. Jean asks Ash for a favor, and Ash immediately agrees without hesitation. Let's accept this bitter disappointment. He wasn't even invited to join. Jean gently soothes him, saying that recruiters simply don't understand people. He is firmly convinced that Amadeo takes on adventures only with those adventurers who have a true spirit. Let's worry that the expedition will turn into a mess because of Amadeo's chosen accomplices. Looking at the food, he is overcome with a sense of duty, and he still decides to go. Jean and Ash wish him safety, and he amusingly asks for at least a little sympathy. Chris asks Jean to join, but he categorically refuses. He doesn't want to camp just on the street. Let's share the news. Jean's individual bags are a real hit among the golden rank party. A bright, pleading smile blooms on Jean's face, and he sincerely thanks. He announces that he is leaving the meeting and exits the building. At the city office, Jean approaches an employee and asks about houses for sale in his area. He says that he is looking behind the Fox, where he and Ash live. The clerk confirms that he is a tenant and says that he is considering the area. Smiling, the clerk asks him to wait a minute while she checks. Jean thinks to himself that for now he is just asking on a whim. Returning enthusiastically, the employee offers him several houses to choose from. Jean was surprised. He always thought that only owners of silver ranks could buy real estate. The clerk explains that because of his large business, he has guild vouchers. She presents him with a choice, to buy his current house or to purchase a better one. Jean decides to buy the housing he is currently renting and says that it suits him. The clerk says that another guild house will soon be put up for sale. Jen feels that houses near the outer walls are like a harsh cage because of monsters. The scribe whispers a rumor that Amadeo of the golden rank can get this for his retinue. Jean grimaced with irritation as soon as he imagined his possible new neighbors. He decisively tells the clerk that he will also take that house for renovation. Having just bought 2 houses, he walks away, immersed in thoughts about his new plans. He decides to start the renovation exactly from the back door of his new home. Suddenly someone appears, waves cheerfully at Jean, and asks a question. Jean says he will stay out of the expedition after all. Most participants came from other cities. Let's jokingly reproach him for not being grateful to the golden rank monster hunter. Jean says he knows neighbor Ash is currently hunting bears. He asks let him know if even one room nearby becomes available. Jean freezes with surprise when Let's unexpectedly says he is moving himself. We will tell that after the recent rank promotion, he can finally buy his own house. Jean looks with admiration. He is impressed by how much effort and work this success cost Let's. Suddenly, Jean had an idea. His eyes opened wide with a flash of inspiration. He smiles and asks if you are free tomorrow to help with something. The next day, Jean asks Let's to keep the doors open for him in the building. What a shock it was to find out that both Jean and Ash have their own homes here. Jean reveals his secret of nature, but says he prefers not to share the well for potion making. He quietly reflects. He wants to help people, but at the same time wants his actions to remain in the shadows. While working, Jean curiously asks which exact house he is looking for. Here is his ideal home, 3 floors and downstairs a shop with a display window. Jean turns around and curiously asks why he needs a display window for his new home. He shyly explains how it will be for his wife, and Jean is completely shocked by this. Coming to his senses, Jean asks a little disappointed if Let's has met anyone. Let's blushes and insists, supposedly buy a house and the wife will find herself. Nadia Jin's hope for a love story flared up again, and he eagerly asks to hear all the details. He categorically denies having a partner, saying that work is the most important thing for him. At lunch, Let's praise his cooking genes and ask about that slightly sour taste. Jin suddenly felt a sharp realization. He forgot that there are no tomatoes in this world. He tries to cover up his mistake, scolding Let's for eating unfamiliar food. Let him fully trust Jin's dishes and surprise the host with this. This trust flatters Jin, and he admits that it makes him a little embarrassed. Let's approach and ask Jin, does he think the golden ranks will bring them trouble? Jin slowly twirls the pasta on his fork, and his face becomes serious and thoughtful. He admits he just wants to stay away from them and their supporters. Let's understand correctly, Jin just wants to avoid ending up in their company. He warns if he finds out that Jin sees spirits, it will become a big problem. The size of the Jin that agreed with Let's assessment of that complicated situation. A dark empty frame seems to press, emphasizing the weight of Let's serious words. The Jin is stunned, losing ground under its feet, not understanding how Let's could have known its secret at all. Let's watch calmly with a knowing look, waiting for the Jin's reaction. The revelation hung in the air, as if putting a period the end of the chapter. Let's gaze remains calm, meanwhile inside Jin panic only grows. Smiling arrogantly, we ask if Jin understands what he is talking about. He shows his hint, Chris never calls Jin by his real name. Jin smiles, recalling Chris's bright nicknames, and suddenly realizes Let's was right. Let's suggest that Jin simply ask Chris to call him by his real name, warmly praising his character. Jin silently accepts the advice, still digesting the stunning revelation. The young man thought about the traveler Chris, acknowledging his good heart and that everyone loves him. He, however, admits that Chris's noisy nature sometimes overwhelms him a bit. Chris appeared with a theatrical gesture and cheerfully exclaimed the nickname, "Oh, Evening Twilight." Jen thoughtfully considers how Chris relies on intuition, unaware of its true spiritual source. We wonder among ourselves whether to reveal Chris's secret after all. It would expose his ability to see spirits. Jin aloud wonders, can this be called a secret if Chris himself suspects nothing? Suddenly, Faina was gripped by dramatic panic, and he asks what he should do in this situation. Jin thinks Let's is having too much fun and Let's teases him, saying, "You're in trouble." With a victorious smile, Let's admit, he suspected all along that there was something special about Chris. Jin froze in shock and burst out, the whole Let's show is just a clever bluff. With a dark but fascinated smile, Jin admits, they completely outsmarted him. Let's place a comforting hand on Jin's shoulder and promise to guard the golden ranks instead of him. When Let's Walk Away plays, Jin is filled with amazement at his friend's maturity and life experience. Blurred, abstract image seems to whisper about the flow of time and change of focus. Jin tends his fields and at the same time gives names to the spirits standing in the path of the expedition squad. He recalls how together with Ash he created a revolutionary treatment for eyes, which caused a commotion in the guild. Sitting by the fire, Jin looks into the flames and thinks about the huge amount of work still ahead. He turns to his dog-like friend Rish, time to act like a man of love. A mysterious figure in a cloak instantly vanished into the forest, leaving behind a quiet, swift rustle. Jen in the cloak notices that other nations have started hunting expeditions in the forest. He admits he disguises himself to secretly find out where and when he was seen. Peeking from behind a bush, he let out a sharp cry he saw something alarming. He found his targets 3 adventurers surrounded by sinister wolves. He instantly recognizes the adventurers they are from the Empire, and notices horned monsters nearby. Diving from the sky, owls and bats merge into a swarm of monsters. A huge roaring bear stood on its hind legs, adding yet another threat to the already staggering number of dangers. Grabbing the knife and fork, he easily cuts the tender, perfectly cooked steak. He brings the first juicy piece of steak to his mouth and savors it. His face spreads with pure joy as he says that it is delicious. He is touched by the simple, deep flavors of the well-seasoned dish. Later, lying in bed, he realizes that he no longer has to worry about the fire. A wave of relief washes over him. He is finally safe from the beasts. Looking at his majestic appearance, he accepts that he will now live here. Hiding under the fluffy duvet, he cannot fall asleep, though the bed is so soft. A new chapter begins. He proudly introduces himself as Kanahanagen. After a few weeks, he wakes up with a groan, having done almost nothing, just eating and sleeping. After washing, he seemed to feel purpose and determination anew. In his head, he quickly goes through possible recipes from the ingredients in his pantry. He thought about cooking ramen, but he was more drawn to the unique dishes of this world. He notices dried bonito flakes and kombu and notes that they are still raw. In the pantry, he suddenly realizes he has no wheat to grind into flour. On the wooden table, a simple lunch waits silently: fried fish and rice. He eats with pleasure, grateful that he still knows how to cook decent food. He remembered the map and money and decided that he should try going shopping. Unfolding the map, he asks himself where to go on his first trip. His hand glides over the boundless map, showing kingdoms and continents. He recalls the place that was recommended to him and quickly finds it on the map. In a surge of energy, he uses his transition skill and teleports. He recognizes before him a settlement surrounded by walls, the border town of Canaan. He thought that this was the perfect place to earn gold by killing monsters. At the city gates, the guard asks to show documents and pay a toll. He becomes embarrassed, noticing that he stands out from the crowd. He wonders is it because of his clothes or his appearance and decides to buy local clothes. Now in a cloak with a hood, he decides to go shopping and blend in with the crowd. In the shop, he touches a roll of fabric and feels its stiffness. He held a heavy bag of money in his hands and looked around at various stalls. He holds a coin and suddenly a cute cartoon face of Rish appears in his mind. He feels that there is a considerable sum there, the same as his sister's. Russell draws his attention to an exquisite bottle on the top shelf. He recognizes an expensive potion often seen in fantasy games. He decides that he can probably make one himself if he applies his skill in appraisal. His thoughts drift to food. He wants to try the local cuisine. His appraisal skill detects dangerous bacteria, and he decides not to do it. Simple scales suddenly catch his eye and pull him into another shop. He becomes interested in the appearance of the scales and the grapevine wallpaper nearby. He admiringly gazes at the exquisite wallpaper and suddenly realizes that he still needs tools for working in the garden. He approaches the shopkeeper and asks if he can buy a pitchfork. He unexpectedly asks for a twig from the wallpaper outside. A young girl offers to recommend a good weapons store. The shopkeeper immediately guessed that he was a novice in adventures and began giving advice with a smile. He imagines the terrible heat when wearing metal armor in summer. He sincerely thanks the kind saleswoman for her helpful advice. In the weapon shop, he felt as if he had entered a game. He holds a simple but sturdy long sword and tests its weight and feel in his hand. He hides the new knife in its sheath and, despite hesitation, decides which equipment to take. Now with everything needed, he thoughtfully recalls the exhausting but successful day of shopping. He notices the neighboring tavern, but knows well teleportation cannot be used here. He decides to return home because he is worried about his companion Rich. Under the starry sky, he plans to return tomorrow to visit the guild. The next day he comes to the large guild hall with a wooden frame. In the noisy guild, he approaches the counter to register. The administrator offers him a choice, and he instantly decides to pay the fee. While they make his badge, he suddenly remembers he has one more question. He is directed to the library and he reaches for a book, ready to immerse himself in study. At the guild, Jean is reading a book about animals possessed by demonic forests. The manual opens a map of the forest, shows the monster's weak spots and lists useful items. While he was immersed in the book, suddenly a voice sounded from behind. A friendly adventurer approaches smiling and asks if he is the one who requested an escort. Jean confirms this and sincerely admits he is not confident in his abilities. The traveler Dean introduces himself. I am a 2-star silver and I am here due to compulsory service. Hearing about Dean's high rank, Jean raised his eyebrows in surprise and began to say his own name. Embarrassed, he finished the introduction, I am Jean, and shyly asked to be taken care of. Dean smiles, their names are so similar, and Jean is in a panic. He accidentally stumbled over his words. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by an angry shout from a girl. Dean. A girl with 2 blonde ponytails ran up quickly and loudly demanded that Dean not choose companions at random. Dean, thrown off by her outburst, sharply says, shut up and stop bossing me around. Jean watched as the dispute unfolded, and he was irritated by the political games within the guild. Dean threw Jean a brief apology and promised to deal with this troublesome matter. The girl Amel firmly insists that another adventurer named Chris will handle the nobleman's request. Jean glanced at the dish. Her attention was now fixed on his inquisitive gaze. Dean resolutely declares that he will never become a personal contact for the nobility. Crossing his arms, he says in a firm voice that he is trying to correct a mistake from the past. Amel vented her irritation on Jean, accusing him of seeking her intervention. Another young woman intervened and firmly told Emil to stop relying on her brother. Dinner froze at the sudden arrival of Miss Kana, who interrupted it. Dean quietly thanks Kana and she responds with a smile. It's your fault you spoiled Emil. The guild receptionist sighs and apologizes to Jean for the inappropriate display. The dark, textured background signifies the beginning of Jean's inner thoughts. He suddenly realizes what is happening between the brother and sister again awakens in him a familiar instinctive feeling of rejection. He calmly tells the shocked Dean that he is canceling his request for accompaniment. Amel's face lit up with a bright smile and she warmly thanks him. She cheerfully advises him to find another party as he passes by her, completely indifferent. Jean approaches the counter and, with cold confidence, tells the receptionist that he no longer needs accompaniment. Dean calls him, trying to object to this sudden decision. The receptionist apologizes again and assures him that the full amount paid will be refunded. Jen smiles and says it's okay but asks, can he instead take the adventurer's guidebook? A large adventurer's guild building with a wooden frame appears before his eyes. Jean stood on the street in the town and sighed deeply, irritated. He closes his eyes and vows never to endure such suffocating attachment again. A small fairy-like girl appears and asks if he intends to use his sharing skill. He quickly shshshkh nuv Mistu, reminding her that only he sees her now. Mistu advises him he can communicate with her through his consciousness. She assures that he can hear her thoughts if he consciously directs them to her. Miss Hito jokingly hints that he can allow himself indecent thoughts, but then sharply denies it. He decides to use his skill of disconnection to sever all ties with his sister. Miss Hito warns, if you expand the target of the skill, its effectiveness will weaken. Jean looks worriedly, not believing that the power of skills can fade. She cheerfully floats through the city streets and explains the limits of her abilities. He looks at her and sincerely thanks her for the useful information. She shines with a smile surrounded by flower petals and gently responds to his gratitude. Mistu disappears in a white whirlwind of light, leaving Jean to continue the path alone. Jean wonders whether she appeared to advise or was simply interested in him. Without accompaniment, he dares to set out alone into the demon forest. On the textured panel, a cobblestone path is depicted, leading beyond the city limits. The guard at the city gates nodded to him, giving permission to leave. Beyond the huge city walls, Jin tightly clutches the adventurer's guidebook he obtained. Flipping through the instructions, he reads with a thrill that rabbits with horns appear near the forest entrance. He recalls a library record that insisted, monster horns are extremely important. The guidebook says weak monsters are called hornless because their horns are so tiny they seem non-existent. Looking at the drawings of the rabbits, a steely confidence awakens in him he will definitely be able to fight them. Being alone, he dares to use his special ability. With a dramatic whistle, he summons his powerful, luxuriously decorated sword that kills all. Ready in the tall grass, he prepares for his first solo hunt. A sudden burst of movement, and next to him appeared a small, ordinary white rabbit. He relaxes, thinking that it is just an ordinary animal, but suddenly hears another rustle. A terrible rabbit jumped into the air, sliding down the slope. The creature had a tiny horn and blackened eyes. It lunged at him. Although she looks like a monster, he recognizes her as a hornless rabbit. In a blurred motion, he swung the sword and hit the rabbit that rushed towards him. He froze for a moment, stunned by how quickly and decisively it all ended. He looked at the dead rabbit and realized with shock that he had killed it with one blow. He puts the carcass into a bag and wonders if his sword from the shop will hold up. A powerful sound of the blade echoed in the panel. It is a signal of a new attack. He glances at the new target, ready to rush into battle again. He easily dealt with the horned rabbit with a simple sword and felt surprise. Carrying his body, he continues his way through the forest, where the sun plays patches on the ground. A panel with a relief texture paints a lush, calm forest around him. Using his appraisal skill, he spotted a healing plant in that beautiful patch of grass. He finds wild berries and thinks with delight how generous and pleasant this forest is. His chibai version is thrilled with his new useful skills. He uses the storage skill the herbs swirl in a magical vortex and disappear. Seeing a pile of mushrooms, he immediately recognized them, the same ones were on the island. The check showed that they are edible, and he sincerely regrets not knowing this earlier. Suddenly he shudders, a drop of sweat glistens on his face. He senses danger. He feels the presence of a monster, something much bigger than a rabbit. He turns sharply, anxiety on his face, searching for where the danger is coming from. From a large horned figure right in front of him came a low, muffled growl. A giant horned bear rose on its hind legs and let out a terrible roar. On his face is a genuine mask of shock as he recognizes this mighty monster. The scene slowly changes, revealing tall forest trees against a bright sky. Jin looks thoughtful as if he just came out of a tense and dangerous clash. The bear now lies dead, and suddenly Mistu appears, startling him with the shout, "Daddy." He reproaches Mistu for appearing so suddenly, and she smiles and lightly apologizes. He admits that he completely forgot he knows how to use magic. She hints that he shouldn't wander in search of another monster. Mistu cheerfully advises him to try using his searching skill instead. Jin suddenly realizes that he was given a bunch of abilities he barely paid attention to. He decides to activate his exploration skill. His focus sharpens sharply. A sight flashes before his eyes, locking onto a horned hare. He blushes, realizing that his hunt could have been much easier from the start. Mistu begins to teach him the very first and most important basics of using magic. She lists various magical properties that he possesses thanks to God's blessings. The horned rabbit rushes straight at him, a perfect target. Closing his eyes, Jin gathers his thoughts into a fist, preparing to imagine his spell. With a determined shout, the young man releases a powerful spell, Wind Slash. The magical attack worked. The small horned rabbit lies lifeless. Staring at his hand, he is stunned. The magic truly materialized. He turns to Miss Hito, the girl who is hovering, and sincerely thanks her. As she fades, Miss Hito advises him that other spirits will give him their power. He summons a small cyclone. His wind magic begins to clear everything around. Hiding the loot, he now decides to sell it at the guild. Sitting next to a huge bear, he wonders how to deliver it to the guild. Arriving at the Merchant's Guild, he politely asks to have his goods inspected and appraised. The guild worker with spiky hair looks intently and listens carefully to the young man's question. With a dramatic gesture, he shows an incredibly huge sack, and the guild worker froze in surprise. The worker asks how he carried it, noting his rough appearance. He justifies it to himself, better a sack than displaying the monster's wounds. His gaze stops on the dismembered corpses of monsters hanging from the ceiling. A memory surfaces of his time on the island those days when he dealt with fish and animals. He feels that his strength of spirit now makes this gruesome sight bearable. The worker gestures to the boy where to place the heavy load. After inspecting, the worker could not hide his admiration for this first-class bear fur. The man says that the Adventurers Guild would pay more for this. In his soul, he resolutely decides to stay away from those troublesome brothers and sisters from the other guild. He then asks if he can learn to brew potions, and the worker asks for some time. The man says that trade guilds are those who spread common knowledge. He announced that he is leaving and earnestly requested a full evaluation. In a moment, he triumphantly raises the newly acquired scroll with potion recipes. Flipping through the scroll, he was surprised to see how diverse its contents were. He decides that the very process of brewing potions is surprisingly simple. He decided to disguise his innate ability to heal using potions. He was completely lost in thought and, suddenly, the guild worker calls him loudly. The man admits that he found a magic stone and offers to show it. Surprised, he recalls reading about such things in the guidebook. Magic stones are rare, expensive gems formed from the remnants of a monster's spiritual essence. The worker talks about the properties of the stone are simply made for fire magic. He agrees to the exchange because he says he does not need it to use magic. His affairs in the guild building with a wooden frame are now completed. Having finished his business, he decides to take a walk around the city and eat. He walks along the narrow, stone-paved streets of the city. The path led him to a noisy market teeming with people. The lively, colorful atmosphere of the market fills him with admiration. His eyes slid from giant wheels of cheese to dried meat. The stalls are bursting with various goods. Here are sausage rings and salami. His eyes stop on large bowls of noodles and long stuffed rolls being sold. He notices that most of the local bread is simple, suitable only for sandwiches. Using his skill to evaluate, he carefully looks at the sausages frying on the grill. Confident that a well-fried sausage is safe, he politely orders one. He takes a big, satisfied bite of the freshly prepared sausage. He thinks it is fatty, and he concludes that calories are the main thing for the local adventurers. His attention is immediately drawn to the stall with various dried fruits. He tries several dried fruits and thoughtfully chewing walks on. One of the canned fruits turned out to be unbearably sour. He was stunned. Coming to his senses, he immediately thought about what delicious dish could be made from this fruit. His gaze fell on the seller who was trading what seemed to be brown sugar. He is fascinated by the old scales used to weigh lumps of sugar. The smell of fermentation lures him to the brewery, and he suddenly wonders how old one must be to drink here legally. The simple joy of wandering the market gives him a light feeling of cheerfulness. He goes further through the noisy, crowded market street. The murmur of the talking crowd ahead ignites his curiosity. He peeks around the corner of the house to see what has gathered them here. He froze in amazement, seeing a whole pig roasting over the fire. The impressive sight of a whole roasted pig simply mesmerizes him. The vendor explains that the appetizing-looking pork is for making sandwiches. Without hesitation, he approaches the counter and orders one for himself. The vendor hands him a thick sandwich that looks incredibly appetizing. Taking a huge bite, he felt that the taste was simply incredible. He tastes carefully and decides, the pork is juicy but the bread is a disappointment. He firmly decides, later he will buy a whole roasted pig for the pantry. Night slowly falls and he returns to his stately house near the mountains. He quietly whispered about his return to his sleeping companion who looked like a fox, Rish. He sits down and thinks that his time on the island has shrunk his stomach. Sitting next to the basket, he watches as his hand releases a quiet squeak. His hand begins to softly glow with a warm, gentle light as he prepares to heal. He knows that the very essence of Rish is fading and healing magic is powerless here. Despite everything, he sincerely wishes for his companion to recover as soon as possible. He looks at the starry sky and whispers to the quiet hut, "Good night." Morning light seeps through the trays, thus begins a new day. He sits down for a simple breakfast, fried fish, rice, and soup. While eating, he could not get rid of the resentment of that bad fabric he saw in Kanemi. His ability to understand the language ignites a desire to read local books. Today he decisively decides to visit the huge, multi-level royal capital. By the gates of the capital, he asks the guard with hope in his voice for a map or a guide. The guard hands him a simple map guide so that he does not get lost in the city. The guard warns, the tour of the trade guild may turn out to be a scam. Better, though riskier, to hire one of the local boys. He sincerely thanks the guard for the advice and hands him a reward for the help. The guard recommended a specific guide, a boy named Leon. He sincerely thanks for that useful advice. He enters the city and is glad. It's good that he chose the neighboring country just in case. Walking the streets, he notices that the small houses seem to have grown together. The path led him to the main square of the city, where a huge building loomed over everything. Suddenly, he remembers the guard's words: Leon should be looked for near the well. Noticing a figure near the well, he cautiously approaches to ask if this is Leon. He is instantly stunned by the storm of emotions that overwhelmed him. Leon turns around and looks at him intently, hostilely. Leon, with obvious hostility, demands to know what business he has come for. After the aggressive greeting, the air crackles with silent tension. Inside, he trembles with horror at Leon's incredibly frightening expression. The mention of the guard seems to intensify Leon's threatening look. Fearing he has been set up, he nervously says that maybe he was mistaken. Suddenly, Leon softens and agrees to become his guide. Recovering, he asks his new guide to suggest which places here must definitely be seen. Leon suggests looking at the view from the fortress but immediately adds, "No entry there." Leon, with a stone face, coldly said that civilians are forbidden to enter the fortress. Jin internally debates how to respond to such a useless piece of advice. Suddenly changing the subject, he asks for advice where to find good clothing stores or eateries. Leon's face became threatening. He pushes them to eat faster because he knows the store. Jin is puzzled and silently asks himself why his guide always has such a fearful expression. Their boots echo loudly on the cobblestones as they walk through the city streets. Speaking casually, Jin turned his head to ask his guide again. Leon explains, the city taxes houses based on the width they occupy along the road. Jin couldn't hold back and asked why the houses stand so close, pressed against each other. His guide details other taxes, even those imposed on transit and on glass. Surprised by the glass nails, Jin realizes windows here are a true luxury. He recalled in Kanemi there was not a single glass window and finally understood why. His gaze fell on a large, luxuriously decorated building they noticed in the square. Leon instantly recognizes, this is the Spirit Arch, a wonderful place with a fountain. Jin thoughtfully realized that people here clearly strongly believe in spirits. Leon turned away, made a contemptuous sound, and abruptly cut off the explanation. He apologizes, admitting that he should be showing such Jin places. The genie calms him down, thinking that Leon turns out not to be so bad after all. Leon muttered to himself that leading tour is not for him. An elder, impeccably dressed gentleman appears. Leon calls him Note. The man's face floods with relief as he calls the young Mississippi. Jin was so confused that he looked around, searching for the person the man was addressing. His head is filled with questions about the butler's clothing and that strange title. Leon quietly explains that Note has been the butler of his family since childhood. Then he demands to know why the butler is here, completely ignoring Jin's surprise. Leon looks away, his face becoming serious. He anxiously awaits the butler's answer. Jin in horror, the forest is teeming with monsters, and hunters are turning into prey. He still remembers how Kina from the guild said that recently there has been a shortage of scouting parties. One of the adventurers shouted when the shadow beast lunged at him. Without hesitation, Jin rushed forward, his hands glowing with charged magical energy. With a determined look, Jin releases his power amid splashes of dark blood. 3 adventurers froze in stunned silence, watching the sudden and brutal intervention. Once threatening monsters now lie defeated on the ground, and in their eyes crosses. The lead adventurer sharply turned to the figure in the cloak and demanded abruptly, "Who are you?" The figure in the cloak extended a hand, a healing spell flared over the wounded adventurer. The traveler looks down, not believing his eyes, and exclaims, "I am completely healed." The mysterious figure sternly warned them, "Do not risk further in this forest." The healed man shouted to the leader, "Wait." He was completely confused by what had happened. Comrades rushed to him, sighing with relief that he was safe, while he in tears blames himself for his weakness. Jen in a cloak, watching from afar, is irritated by all this and decides to leave. He thinks about how he became known as the one who appears in this forest. A sharp, angular graphic transition signals a change in his plan. He decided to set a false trail. He called the spirits to tell the adventurers that he was heading northwest. In rhythmic montage, he is seen pretending to be a fool and brewing his potions. 2 months later, at night in the city, Jin calls his butler in confusion. In the tavern, Jin eagerly asks his valet, "Please cut my hair." The butler firmly refused, and Jin, stunned, exclaimed that he was denied. Let's, puzzled, asks if Jin needs money, surprised by this sudden request. Jin explains that he simply decided to ask for help from a skilled valet. He finally admitted he doesn't like the haircuts they do at the local baths. Ash picked up, "It's a pity to cut Jin's light hair." Jin wonders, isn't there something special hidden in this water that makes his hair so shiny? Let's suggest growing it longer, but Jin refuses, says it's extra trouble with washing. A mischievous idea struck him, maybe he should just shave his head. Let's panics, desperately offered to cut Jin's hair himself, just to stop this extreme step. Jin froze in surprise, thinking, did his sixth sense hint this, or is he just too predictable? The butler advises the Jins to simply hire a servant, but this idea seems absurd to the Jin. The bell on the tavern door rang, announcing the arrival of new people. Dean and Chris enter with a cheerful greeting and joyfully shout that the whole gang is here. Let's greet them warmly and sincerely, congratulating them on completing their quest. Jinside mentally, newcomers are always loud and restless. Let's ask Dean how the Golden Rank adventurer Amadio and his squad are doing. Dean confirms Amadio is strong and gets along wonderfully with his two companions. Chris theatrically admits that he envies their spiritual weapon and hopes to be loved the same way someday. Jin thinks that Chris's choice of words is somewhat suggestive and seems inappropriate. An archer proves by example, a weapon with a spirit is useless if the spirit does not love its bearer. Jin thought in surprise, is that really how spirit weapons work? As soon as he returns home, he decides to take special care of his blade. Dean does not hide his distrust of the hero's followers, he is convinced they act with blind faith. Jen sighed mentally, good thing I didn't get involved with them. Chris announces, this time there are 4 heroes and the Empire gives them full freedom to act. Jin simply froze in shock and exclaimed that there turned out to be as many as 4 heroes. In his memory appear his sister and her friends, those he considered the only heroes. He recalls the meeting with the gods and realizes that he never had a chance to ask a question. During the conversation, the truth is revealed, heroes are created to become stronger over time. The traveler notices, the further west he wanders, the rarer the spirits appear. Ash angrily demands, who is responsible for taming the heroes? Dean says that because of the heroes' actions, the chance of a monster invasion sharply increased. Chris dramatically complains that all the monsters jumped out of their burrows at once. Let's change the subject and gently nudge them not to touch such serious topics. Out of the blue, he challenges the puzzled Jin, who will drink more one-on-one. Let's and Chris agreed on the terms of a bet revolving around secrets and brothels. Jin looks confused at the strange names of establishments they mention. He suddenly realizes that they are talking about elite brothels, where entry is only by recommendation. Ash agrees to the bet, and he doesn't care at all that it seems suspicious. At the mention of brothels, Ash notices a frightened expression on the butler's face. Ash worries about the brothel's reputation and openly states that it is not an elite place at all. The butler froze without words when he realized. Ash is worried about something completely different. The night ends with us unconscious from drinking, caught in the crossfire of the contest. The butler could not help but notice how impressively Jean handles alcohol. Jean smiles and admits that the magic of heals leaves him only slightly drunk. The butler entrusted Jean with looking after Ash while he cleans up himself. Jean agrees, noticing a barely noticeable change in Ash's behavior. Ash blushed and seemed confused. It is clear that the alcohol is taking its toll. Jean notes that Ash also seems to be tipsy. The butler smiles, confirming that seeing a drunk Ash is a real rarity. Ash confidently insists that he can walk alone without any problems. Jean shouted anxiously Ash as he staggered. He lunges forward, warning Ash that he is about to crash into the wall. Ash, leaning against him, mumbles that everything is fine, but Jean states that he is completely drunk. A gentle hand reaches out and a soft voice persuades, relax. Jean tells the drunk Ash to calm down, and he quietly, barely audibly mumbles in agreement. He smiles he needs to intervene before Ash crashes straight into the wall. Jean, wrapping his arm around Ash, supports him and leads him down the quiet, moonlit street. Their boots echo on the cobblestones and suddenly Ash freezes in place. Jean turns with concern and asks his companion, is something wrong? Raising his gaze with a flushed face, Ash quietly whispers Jean's name. Completely stunned by the intimate moment, Jean makes a questioning sound. Their boots are still on the cobblestones and the question hangs in the air, what is wrong? From behind, Jean calls Ash, still holding him tightly. A close-up shows Ash's confused, tipsy face while Jean watches. Ash leans closer and quietly whispers the name Jean again to start the chapter. Chibai-gen is amusingly puzzled by Ash's quiet, agreeing whisper. Under the starry sky, Ash drunkenly mumbles about a brothel, and Jean looks confused. Ash nods as if his nonsensical words made perfect sense, and this annoys Jean. Drunken Ash starts a conversation about hair and confuses Jen even more. Jean admits he doesn't understand this conversation, and Ash still agrees. A close-up of Jean's eye, it shows confusion over his companion's state. He notices how alcohol has softened Ash's features. The confused look in Ash's eyes slightly worries him. Jean quietly whispers Ash's name, his gaze fixed on his companion. Suddenly another man appears and sternly warns, drinking in public is dangerous. Jean thoughtfully looks at Ash, considering the stranger's wise advice. Ash quietly agrees under the cloudy but starry night sky. The next morning, Jean was standing in the kitchen, kneading a lump of dough. He is worried whether everyone is okay after yesterday's drinking bouts. Having made sure the others are fine, he decided to prepare something to ease Ash's hangover. He approaches the door and knocks decisively. The door opened and showed Ash he looked terrible. Jean asked how he was feeling. Another man hands over bread and sausages, but Ash complains of stomach pain. Jean offers to use the kitchen to prepare something more suitable. Instead, he serves a warm drink made from ginger syrup and citrus. Ash swallowed and was surprised to feel both a sharp and sweet taste at the same time. Jin gently advises him to rest and drink plenty of water. Feeling noticeably better, Ash thanks Jin and apologizes for making him worry. Jin was just about to leave when Ash quickly called his name. Ash, with a sparkle in his eyes, reminds him of the promise to visit the Bow of Spirits together. Jin agrees, recalling their first meeting, and says he has time. The elderly butler smiles and promises to let them know when it's time to go. The next day, the town wakes up under a bright sky. Jin and Ash walk together, and Ash says he feels much better. Jin watches as they walk through the town. On Ash's head settled a small fluffy bird named Azu, sitting happily. Jin notices that although Azu shines with joy, Ash, as always, frowns. A young girl asks if this is their first visit to Kanam's Bow of Spirits. She quietly confirms, this is exactly the place where they came because of Dean's sister's spirit. Their boots touch the path, and with every step there was an announcement of their arrival. Before them towers the Arch of Spirits, a beautiful stone building. Ash noticed that such a noticeable building is a common thing in big cities. Inside, Ash acts as a guide and points to the workshops. He gestures for Jin to look deeper inside, towards the courtyard. Jin's eyes opened wide with incredible amazement when he saw what stood before him. Trees and a stone wall framing this beautiful scene are glimpsed briefly. He asks if that branch near the fountain is the very bow after which this place was named. Ash stands by the sparkling fountain and explains that it is a gift from the royal bow. Jin pondered he preferred studying world history rather than the legends of bows. He looks at this simple bow and thinks, is it just an imitation or a fake? Ash silently observes while Jin is lost in thought, and his little bird has settled on his head. Ash explains that the royal tree is sacred to the spirits. Jin panics inside. He thinks Ash has noticed his ignorance on this topic. Suddenly, he remembers that he already confessed to Ash that he knows nothing. The story reveals the power of bows and the oaths associated with them. The map shows 3 nations that inherited the royal bow. Jin suddenly realizes that his sister was sent to one of those countries. Ash explains that magical stones create a cozy field for the spirits. Jin thinks that the whole process of making offerings is a complete hassle. He does not take his eyes off the woman approaching the fountain and wonders, does she work here? The woman carefully pulls a glowing magical stone from the basket. She gently lowers the stone into the water basin of the fountain. Jin watches as pebbles are placed into the sparkling water. He was puzzled, wondering how much longer these rare and expensive stones could support the spirits. He asks skeptically, is it really true that without those stones the field won't hold? Ash says that without them the magic will simply dissipate. While he speaks, a tiny winged spirit like a fairy appears near Jin. The fairy rushes to the fountain, shouting that the spirits are approaching. Jin freezes and realizes that the spirits are turning the water into holy water. Ash, with a lively sparkle in his eyes, explains the night ritual. They light a fire so that the next harvest will be abundant. He again offers to show Jin the city, and Jin gladly agrees. Jin is confused. A new conclusion instantly flashes in his mind. He can hardly believe himself. Did he really just agree to a night date with Ash? Suddenly, the bird Azu rises from Ash's head. It suddenly swoops down on the fountain and raises a huge spray that flies straight at the shocked Ash. Jin and Ash look surprised as the tiny spirit watches the splash. The last thought flashed, how beautiful Ash is when not frowning. The frame shifts to the facade of a magnificent mansion. Rudial Jin tends the campfire together with his comrade Rish. He pulls a perfectly baked sweet potato from the glowing embers. Rudial proudly surveys his blooming fields and rejoices in their success. He wrestles with the thought of crossbreeding plants, but doubts his own abilities. He beamed with joy when he noticed a tiny fairy gently caring for the pea sprouts. He also notices spirits in the cabbage and Italian parsley. His thoughts drift to his comrade Rish. He spots Rish near the onions and calls out anxiously. The woman's eyes widened with anxiety. Suddenly she emerges and warns, Rish is not a dog, he must not eat onions. Rudial admits that her sudden appearance scared him quite a bit. He cannot help but wonder, does Richa act this way because of feelings for the former leader? The woman thought that Rudial probably has many thoughts about that leader. Rudial, inspired by the cute vegetables, suddenly had an idea in his head. The old woman, her friend, and the boy appear in the garden. Jin gratefully watches as the young boy, Ish, diligently waters the fields. Then the old woman in a hood named Pal walks through the garden with a quiet, graceful presence. As she moves, plants sprout around her from magiquietly with soft pops. Large, flawless strawberries suddenly appear on the vines exactly where the friend just passed. Jin watched in awe at what was happening, thinking that his life had truly turned into a fantasy story. His gaze slides to Rudial, who stands next to Rish, and he wryly calls her the servant of that creature. Suddenly, Jin was struck by a spark of inspiration. A new idea appeared in his head. He turns back to the spirits and suggests, maybe they would like to taste vegetables from his garden. Believing that they will be able to taste it, he decides trying won't hurt. He carefully serves a beautifully prepared salad, topped with one majestic strawberry. The group gathered around the table, and Jean, smiling, encourages them to try just a little first. Pao raises the fork to her lips, and a gentle curiosity plays on her face. Rudial eats with a calm expression, eyes closed. She savors every bite. Leaning forward, Jin eagerly awaits their final evaluation of his dish. Ishinpal enthusiastically praised the salad, saying it is sweet, tangy, and so fresh. Overflowing with joy, Jin realizes that now he can prepare many vegetable dishes for them. A simple remark from Rudil about the sweetness makes him wonder, does she like the taste of onion? On the screen, a large multi-story residential building, a sign that the scene is changing. From inside, Jin answers the knock on the door and loudly calls out, "I'm coming." He opens the door with a radiant smile and warmly invites the guests inside. Here come Ash and the butler. They have come to the housewarming. In the modestly furnished room, Jin proudly says that he spared no effort and did everything to make this event excellent. Let's jokingly complain that Jin made him work like a slave on those two houses. The butler and Ash sincerely thank Let's for all his tireless work. The butler quietly contemplates his decision to take over the management of the estate for Ash's protection. A sad memory arises about their dangerous escape from Ash's vengeful brother, the Duke. He instantly drives away dark thoughts with a simple internal no. Let's say that thanks to the payment from Jean, he got a discount on the rent. Jean is secretly impressed by how the butler instantly and businesslike decided to rent the room to Let's. Let's feel his relief. He found a cheaper rent on the outskirts of the city. He says hopefully that he will one day buy a house and live in it until the end of his days. Jean jokingly asks, "So bought a house, now we start looking for a wife?" Embarrassed, he scratched the back of his head and insisted that he was not at that stage yet. Ash misunderstood the conversation and decided that first you need to buy a house to find a wife. The tour of the new house began. Jean enthusiastically explains how the first floor is arranged. He opened his eyes wide and looked at the bathroom and toilet behind the wall with surprise, as if he saw a modern miracle. In Jean's soul, rage boiled over the primitive and unsanitary hygiene standards of this world. His face darkened and he sternly reminded us of the rental conditions. He firmly says that we must bathe every day and clean the bathroom twice a year. Let's sincerely express his admiration for Jean. He himself put all the final touches. Secretly, Jean knows that he used his storage magic and called upon spirits for help. Not daring to tell the truth, he brushed off the compliment, saying it was just a uniform. He led the group upstairs and said that there were 3 rooms on the second floor. Let's was in complete shock when she saw a real bed with a thick, incredibly comfortable mattress. He carefully sits on the edge, feeling the unfamiliar object to sense what it feels like to the touch. Lying on his back, he exclaims what a completely different and wonderful feeling it is compared to straw. Jean explains he did it to avoid insects and advises to occasionally just air out the mattress. Elsewhere, Ash and the butler examine a strange panel on the wall. Their curiosity is bursting. What could it be? Jean gently stops Ash's hand and explains, "Do not push, these are sliding doors." With a light clatter, Ash successfully slid the door, surprise frozen on his face. He excitedly points to the novelty, showing how it opens from both sides and connects the rooms. Jean silently thought that such doors were not appreciated. Heresy are too easy to remove. Ash continues moving the doors back and forth, completely fascinated by this mechanism. Having finished the tour of the upper floors, Jean explains how the entire building is arranged. He smiles reassuringly to the grateful, lets that the rooms have locks for storing weapons, as requested. Lets's face lit up with joy, and he immediately thought about the dishes Jean promised to prepare. The butler and Ash share his excitement, both eagerly await the wonderful meal. Standing between 2 companions taller than him, Jean feels a little small but satisfied. A gentle smile blooms on his face as he thinks about how their lively energy makes him happy. He takes the first bite of the housewarming treat and immediately exclaims, "What a delicious taste." Jean felt genuine excitement as he watched their reactions to his more complex dishes. He explains that this is a morel gratin mushrooms that are technically poisonous. Suddenly, an illustration appears on the screen pointing to the dangerous false morel. In the second illustration for comparison, an edible yellow morel is shown. He nostalgically, and with slight trembling, thinks about his culinary passion, cooking dangerous dishes like fugu fish in his old world. The group continues to enthusiastically praise the gratin, a crispy crust and a tender creamy center. Jen bathes in their compliments, silently encouraging them to keep showering praise. When someone asks for a drink, Jin jokingly refuses to rush off. With flair, Jin announced that he had prepared a special dessert for them. He serves a luxurious piece of chiffon cake, topped with a generous spoonful of maple cream. The butler and Ash took a bite, both delighted by the fluffy and tender texture of the cake. Let's notices with surprise that in their world sweets are usually hard or preserved. Jen recalled how once they were equally amazed by his cassella pancakes. He thinks that sweets here are a rare and heavy luxury, like a dense butter cake. Let's and Ash explain that such treats are usually reserved for special holidays. Ash enthusiastically says that in their town Canaan recently, there has suddenly appeared a whole wave of maple treats. He explains that maple syrup is a special delicacy from the capital. Jean lifts up a large bottle of maple syrup with a cork. The label features an emblem in the shape of a leaf. He happily offers the delighted guests a little more sweet syrup. Once Ash wondered, why didn't they just plant maples here on the spot? Jean notices that Let's and the butler seem to prefer spicy or milder flavors. The butler politely raised his hand and gently declined more syrup. Ash eagerly asks for another serving, and this quietly pleases Jean. The cozy home scene suddenly breaks off, and before the eyes appears a dark, ominous forest. A young girl bursts out screaming, resolutely warning, "Stop, don't you dare touch my brother." She stood before the little boy like a shield, looking straight into the eyes of two threatening men. Peeking from behind a tree, Jean looked grim and serious. Sighing, he realizes he's gotten into a complete mess. He recognized the children from the Dinozo family and can't understand what is happening here. Thugs threaten to deal with the children's father if the children refuse to cooperate. One of the men reaches out his hand. It is clear that he wants to grab the frightened girl. The girl pulls back and tightly closes her eyes. She is afraid that they will touch her. In a sudden outburst of violence, both thugs were thrown into the air. They fell unconscious. Jean emerges from hiding, his face full of anxiety, and asks if they are okay. Overwhelmed with relief, the children shout his name and rush into his comforting embrace. He holds them close, gently asking them to explain what is happening. Seal tearfully tells him that a group of people came and took their father. She anxiously recounts how their mother shouted, "Run," but they were noticed and grabbed. Jean calms her, promising that they will find her father, but she will have to stay silent. Two children agree, and a fragile but renewed determination appears on their faces. A young man named Jean smiles gently and thoughtfully, gazing into the distance. Watching as the sister defends her younger brother, he is restless inside. This familiar scene chills to the bone. Nearby, the kidnappers shout, demanding to know where the children are, holding the parents hostage. Observing from cover, Jin with a grim face assesses how bad everything is. Dinozo, the father, is pressed to the ground while his wife is threatened. Jean realizes that protecting all the hidden children at once will be incredibly difficult. The scarred man mocks the helpless father, calling him the rusty king of wolves. The name Bomber puzzled Jin. A spark of recognition flashed in his eyes for a moment. He recalls the passionate words of a friend about the legendary traveler Bomber. The daughter shouted "Dad," but quickly fell silent from fear. In a blurred burst of movement, a foot slammed against the ground. A sharp striking sound announced the start of the counterattack. Jin rushed into the attack and powerfully struck one of the thugs. Other kidnappers froze in shock and demanded to know what he was doing. For a moment, a slight, knowing smile appeared on the mother's lips. Shiva's mother quietly and intently uttered "Amai" amid the chaos. Unexpectedly quickly, she intercepts the leader's hand. His attack instantly halts. She smoothly disarms the man, twisting the sword out of his hands in one motion. Confidently holding the blade, she threw the enemy a decisive smile. Shiva delivers a powerful sweeping strike. Her immense skill fully manifests. Her strength shocks the spectators and leaves them speechless with admiration. The butler's face became grim as he spoke a sinister, urgent message. Suddenly, a woman in military uniform appears and orders them to leave the city. Jean suddenly realizes this is a completely different person, although she is called Lilith. Lilith sharply pointed to the covered cart and strictly ordered, "Get inside immediately." Leon firmly stands his ground, his face a mask of defiance because he sees no reason to run. The butler tries to pass off the escape as a strategic retreat, but in vain. Unable to bear it, Lilith sharply grabs Leon's hand to force him to finally move. Leon harshly pushed her hand away with one quick, reflexive movement. The butler instantly rushed to them, seeing that the young lady was wounded. Lilith demands to know why they did not use the potion for that wound. The butler bitterly explained, "Their exile means they can no longer afford the potions that saved the family fortune." Watching this chaos unfold, Jean is completely bewildered by what is happening. Lilith hears buzzing from the city and insists they leave before a commotion arises. Jean freezes for a moment by the waiting cart, hesitating, and decides to intervene. He walks forward, extending the potion he brewed himself to help the wounded man. Jean explains that this is a trial product. He tested it with his evaluation skill. Lilith, surprised by the stranger's offer, asks, "Who are you?" He called himself Jean and explained that Leon was his guide. The butler confirmed Jean's story and added that they were heading to the shop on the Thames. Lilith briefly contemplates Jean's offer, her finger pressing against her chin. Jean gestures, calling them to the nearby cart, offering a ride. In the rumbling wagon, the butler gently tends to the wounded Leon. Leon pulls the cork from the given potion and drinks it in one gulp. Jean looks anxiously, hoping that the untested potion he gave will work properly. After Leon recovered, Lilith and the butler sincerely thank Jean. Jean, stunned, silently just wants to jump off the cart and leave. Leon's eyes opened, a look of confusion froze on his face from what he had experienced. They ask where they are, and the butler gently says that they are in the carriage. Leon remembers how he was expelled and insists that he did nothing to deserve such treatment. Lilith says she knows Leon has always been decent, and she reveals the truth. She quietly explains that Leon's younger brother cannot find peace because they are alive. Jean listens and suddenly realizes that he has been drawn into yet another complicated quarrel between brothers and sisters. Leon asked mockingly if it was really wise to arrange a tour in the middle of a family quarrel. The carriage stopped with a rumble and the butler shouted, "Mr. Alderhyde." In the shop, Leon asks the owner Tame to help Jean choose clothes. Leon apologizes for the tour being left unfinished, but Jean insists it is not the time. Burning with the desire to leave, Jean tells Tame that he is leaving this matter in his hands. Lilith stops Jean and solemnly introduces herself. She is from the House of Deviland. She extends a ring to him and says, "Find me if you get into trouble." Jean is still accepting the ring, with a barely noticeable anxiety on his face. Curiosity overcomes him, and he asks about the young Mississippi. Lilith reveals a shocking truth. Leon is actually a girl named Lyra Alderhyde. Jean is completely stunned. His head is spinning from this sudden, sharp revelation. Lilith says Lyra has such a severe androgynous appearance that many simply mistake her gender. Throwing one last knowing glance, Lilith apologizes and walks away. The butler, apologizing for the trouble, extends money and asks not to say a word. Jean looks around the shop and with surprise notices there is not a single piece of clothing here. Before he could react, lively salespeople immediately surrounded him. He is suddenly pierced by shock. He realizes he is in a tailor's workshop where they sew to order. Soon Jean leaves the store completely exhausted after the fitting. He finds a secluded place and, holding the newly purchased items in his hands, prepares to use his magic. With a whirlwind of energy, he activates the ability to store and hides the package. Having bought sheets and covers, he now intends to visit the bookstore. Returning home, he contentedly enjoys a simple dinner under the endless starry sky. He settles down with the newly bought book, ready for a quiet evening. He announces his return to the large, majestic house that has now become his home. His hand gently glows as he looks at his sleeping feline companion Rish. He stands by the bed, ready to settle in and immerse himself in reading his new books. He reads by the light of a single candle, its flame quietly flickering. The room darkens. It becomes increasingly difficult for him to read by candlelight. He considers making a lamp and examines rapeseed oil as fuel. Like a lightning flash in his mind, a memory of the goddess who taught him magic ignites. Listening to the hint of memory, he raises his finger and focuses on the word light. A small dazzling ball of light materializes before him, glowing brightly. He shines with success and exclaims joyfully, "How convenient this magic is." He sits and replays the chaos of the day in his mind but feels this day gave him much more than it took. His thoughts again drift to Lyra, that young lady with a frightened face whom he met. He never found out what happened to Leora and her companions after they parted ways. Standing by the window despite the uncertainty, he sincerely prays that she is safe. He gazes into the quiet night, his face thoughtful and anxious. Below in his basket, his little companion stretches and awakens. The creature's eyes slowly blinked. It woke up after a long sleep with a quiet, barely audible sound. A new chapter begins. Jin shouts the name of his companion in the mountains. While Jean firmly holds the basket of fruit, Riz playfully rustles in the grass nearby. A young man in a dark cloak said to his fluffy friend who looked like a dog, "It's time for us to return." The narrator whispers that several months have passed since the little creature finally fully woke up. As explained, at first Rich could barely walk, but later recovered and now looks much better. Carrying a basket, the young man walks through the quiet forest, and Rish happily jumps alongside. In a room filled with jars of preserves, he quietly confirms his agreement to the plan. Holding a jar in his hands, he thoughtfully reviews the last days, how he mastered carpentry skills and other new abilities. The smell of medicinal herbs does not give him peace. He is worried and plans expansion by winter. Outside, he stands near a small plant, his face thoughtful. He is considering his next step. A memory surfaces. He bought a cork oak seedling and now hesitates to plant it or not. Now that the sprout is already planted in the ground, he kneels beside it, ready to begin. He decides to sprinkle the newly planted seedling with a special magical growth powder. Sparkling powder falls on the small plant, and a magical transformation begins. The branches of the plants begin to crackle and grow incredibly rapidly. He watched in fascination as the sprout rapidly expanded, and uncontrollably let out an admiring sound himself. The seedling turned into a huge ancient tree, which he looks at with amazement. He remembers how he treated his grape trellis with the same powder, and admired its incredible strength. Seeing a huge source of raw materials in the tree, he plans a trip to the town of Canaan. The scene shifts to the bustling medieval streets of the town of Canaan. Every time he brings goods, renting a room is a real hassle for him. Walking through the city, he notices a handkerchief that fell onto the cobblestones. He recognizes the pink-haired girl who dropped it, and seeing her again, sighs with irritation. His thoughts betray the truth. The girl has been following him since he sold the bear in the trade guild. He decides to deliberately ignore her, turning his back on the confused girl. Suddenly, he feels anxious. Buying household items when he supposedly stayed in a hotel would look strange. With a determined look, he decided that the best way out of his problem was to rent a house. Later, the realtor leads him to a house with a simple stone and wood facade. The agent enthusiastically praises the house, calling it a new, cheap, and safe option. He inspected the door frame, saw a crooked fit, and bitterly thought that old, renovated houses are still better. Despite all the drawbacks, he chooses this house and plans to learn more first, and only then start the renovation. The montage shows how he is learning new things with all his might, helping in cheese making. He is also seen carefully applying plaster to the stone wall and learning the craft firsthand. Having made the decision, he sighs and notices that the girl with pink hair is still spying on him. The season has changed, and now the distant, sharp mountain peaks are covered with snow. He felt the air grow colder when a panicked voice of the girl came nearby. The girl with pink hair is loudly worried, pretending that she has no money. He turns to her and she is surprised to see him standing there. She calls out, trying to get his attention as he begins to walk away from her. She asks anxiously if he is going to the demon forest, warning that it has become much more dangerous in the cold. He calmly says that he has already considered all the risks of the journey. She begs him not to push himself to the limit, insisting that his life is more important than money. He tries to calm the worried girl, saying that he is not taking on too much. She reaches out to stop him and deliberately trips, falling to the ground. On the ground, she says she just stumbled, but winks mischievously as if she knows everything. Her eyes sparkle as she looks up at him, full of hope and pleading. He looks down on her without any admiration and does not understand why she does not lose heart from his constant refusals. Suddenly, he looks away from Herhai's attention, caught by the city gates nearby. A burly man came out of the gates, and the young man froze in surprise. He recognizes the man as the girl's older brother and greets him politely but tiredly. Brother Din recognizes him from that tense meeting in the guild. Din immediately apologizes warmly, folding his hands in a sign of sincere repentance. Jean asks in surprise why Kana is here, and Din explains that her bosses are scolding her. Din says the guild is furious the trade guild has poached an excellent adventurer because of their quarrels. Jean quietly, with a reconciliatory tone in his voice, admits his share in what happened and offers a quiet apology. The younger brother intervenes in the conversation, shifting all the blame onto the sister, saying her terrible words and actions are to blame for everything. Din looks worried while Jean prepares to state his unwavering condition. Jean categorically demands that Din's sister stay away from him every time she sees him in the city. Din reluctantly agrees to the condition, but hesitates for a moment before continuing. He asks defensively if this is okay, insisting that his sister is actually very sweet. Jean is internally shocked by the brother's amazing filter regarding his sister and by his obvious sister complex. Din presses him and asks, if his sister is not his type, then who is some kind of hottie? Jin says he would choose someone with a natural appearance the complete opposite of Din's sister. While he was speaking, an image of an androgynous person with blonde hair flashed through his mind. He quickly clarifies that he needs a feminine person, not someone who looks like a man, and Din remains puzzled. Din, to apologize for all this trouble, offers to show him a place where a rare plant grows. Jin, who is already planning to gather herbs, gladly agrees to the offer. Din happily gives a big thumbs up, pleased with the new arrangement and the chance to make things right. Jin thinks to himself that Din would be a completely ordinary person if not for his obsessive complex about his sister. They set off together into a wild, sunlit part of the forest. Din points to a plant with long, sharp leaves and says it is the valuable herb kinka. Jin suspiciously thinks, doesn't that herbal, earthy smell mean the taste will be unpleasant? Din suggests catching a rabbit and cooking lunch from it, and Jin agrees. Suddenly, Jin is overwhelmed with despair today. He cannot use his skills of transition or storage. Soon, on a small clearing above the crackling bonfire, skewers with meat sizzle. Jin enthusiastically praises Din for the fight. His movements were effective, and a real lesson for the eyes. Din, embarrassed by the praise, shyly asks if Jin is really strong enough to hunt bears alone. Jin explains that his fighting style relies on skill and technique, not brute strength. Din does not understand what brute strength is, looking at Jin's slender body with a questioning gaze. Jin privately laments his short stature and weak muscles, vowing to become stronger. He shudders when Din suddenly appears next to him like lightning. Din kicks something in the bushes. The loud thud sharply frightened Jin. Both men looked up in surprise. Right in front of them appeared a new, completely unexpected person. Jin recognizes this person, Lyra, and abruptly asks, "What are you doing in a place like this?" Lyra says they are here to hunt a bear and collect water. Jin panics inwardly at the very thought of calling Lyra by her real name in front of Din, because he is terribly afraid that Lyra is a fugitive. Din asks if they know each other, and both answer yes. Lyra approaches Din and, without removing her mask, introduces herself under the name Ash. Jin quietly sighed with relief, glad he was right and did not say her real name. Ash apologizes for the old incident and, clenching his fists, promises to repay Jin for the potion he gave him. Din sharply interrupts, stabbing a skewer with roasted rabbit meat into Ash's side, and refuses to accept their apology. Dean, with a friendly, insistent smile, tells Ash that they just need to eat now. He thinks if Ash is strong enough to hunt bears, then they should already have enough money to pay. Ash was frozen in shock when he learned that the room costs 1 gold coin per day, and that is considered expensive. Dean asks what kind of fool settles here, paying such money for a place with a single bed and a table. Ash explains that this was presented by the receptionist with pink hair, and Jean explodes. "I'm being ripped off." Dean and Jean simultaneously realized with horror which pink-haired receptionist was meant. Dean immediately defended his sister Amal, insisting that it was the tavern's fault and that she had no ill intentions. Jean sharply replied and asked why Dean's logic seems to shut off every time it comes to his sister. Dean continued praising Amal. "She is so sweet and tries her best, so everyone should help her." Ash thoughtfully comes to the truth. The receptionist is Mr. Dean's younger sister. Ash's face darkened into a sinister look, and Dean, stunned, nervously pointed at his fearful expression. A young guy named Ash suddenly shouted that there is a spirit standing near someone's sister. He explains that the sign of his influence invisibly hangs over Mr. Dean's head. The embarrassed Dean, all sweaty, nervously insists that he sees absolutely nothing. Jean wonders how strange it is to see the sign of a spirit, but not the spirit itself. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, a single white flower magically grows on Dean's crown. Jean barely holds back laughter, his cheeks puffed up with amusement. He trembled with laughter and begged the one with a serious face, who seemed not to notice him. Looking more closely, Jean suddenly notices this flower looks artificial. He quietly apologizes for what he is about to do, reaching out to that strange growth. With one sharp movement, he tears the flower from Dean's head and raises it, holding it high. Dean's body instantly began to sway, losing all strength and balance. He falls to the ground unconscious, and Jean indifferently apologizes for his action. Ash calmly explains that it was mental control, and Dean fainted when he was interrupted. Jen, responding to Ash, says confidently, "He can touch spirits, he just needs to concentrate." Usually he only sees his companion, so it doesn't affect him at all. Ash froze. It became clear. Jean is the first person with such an ability he has ever met. He explains that in his family only his father sees spirits, but cannot touch them. Jean listened to the warning and promised to be careful with his unique power. Ash anxiously fears that their companion will find out about his ability. It flashed in their minds. Both realize that they are strangers, having met only today. Ash's calm breaks when he realizes the strange connection between himself and this new acquaintance. They are stunned. It turns out their darkly joking thoughts about the bear are exactly the same. With a heavy sigh, Ash resigned himself to the mistaken judgment and this strange situation. Jen notices that Ash seems doomed to always remain at a disadvantage. They sat next to the campfire and began to speak more seriously. Jean asks tensely, does Ash see the spirit that constantly follows him closely? Instantly, the spirit of a small bird appeared and relentlessly began pecking Ash on the head. Jean is shocked. She exclaims that she is being pecked mercilessly. Ash explains that it is not a sharp sensation, but an unbearable dull pain. Jen is very surprised that such sharp pricks are described as dull pain. He thoughtfully hums quietly, leaning closer to get a better look at the bird on Ash's shoulder. He notices a strip of light wrapping around the neck and recognizes it as a collar. Focusing his sight, he activates his special skill of appraisal to learn more. The skill reveals that the bird's goal is to make Ash and Lyra more manly. Jean is completely confused by the strange result of the appraisal skill. Ash quietly explains that his father bound a spirit to him when he was only 7. Jean asks if Ash has a younger brother, and Ash replies that it was for inheritance. Ash tells a strange story about his father's drunken night and the appearance of the spirit. His family has a military history, and that spirit was meant to teach him specifically. Jean sincerely believes he can present the strange Golto, become more manly in a way that even sounds positive. The spirit itself seems completely puzzled. It does not see the difference between male and female. Jean watches as the bird desperately pecks and suggests letting it go. At first, Ash hesitates and emits a disdainful snort. He admits it was supposed to be released 2 years ago, but his father suddenly fainted. A ray of hope appears on his face when he asks if Jean can release it. Jean thinks that maybe he can somehow influence the collar that restrains the spirit. He suggests trying to remove it as soon as they return to the city. Ash agrees, sighing with relief and sincerely promising to express gratitude. Jean suddenly remembers the trouble Ash got into and is stunned to realize he himself forgot the reason. Dean wakes up and apologizes as if he spoiled his sister, but Ash immediately denies it. Jean explains how Dean's deeper connection with that dish gave him much more influence. Dean decisively decided to take his sister to the spirit pavilion to have her cleansed there. He also apologizes to Jean, and Jean reassures him nothing serious happened. Jean understands, and in Kanemi, there must also be a refuge for spirits. His mind is momentarily illuminated by an ethereal vision of the spiritual world. He realizes every city has its own sanctuary where they learn to get along with spirits. Jin says that he must return to the city to take the first preparatory steps. He strongly advises others to use a conveyor for hunting bears. Ash explains that a conveyor is a person who delivers the traveler's prey. Jin hands Ash a note. It contains all the details about the conveyor he has already ordered. When they part ways, Jin still wants to add something to the conversation. Dean confidently raises his finger and promises to keep their abilities secret. The deep dark forest fell silent as the companions parted. Suddenly there is rustling in the underbrush, and from the shadows emerge two threatening wolves, growling. Jin rushed forward, his sword blurring in motion, and he released a powerful slash. Ash praises Jin for his agile and precise movements as the second wolf falls under his blade. Jin silently admires Ash's calm swordsmanship, feeling that his own skills are only an imitation. The hired carriers are gripped by panic as their rented cart creaks under the weight of the lurking wolves. Two men barely manage an incredibly heavy load of dead wolves. Jin and Ash think that their haul of wolves should suffice as compensation. Carrying the rest, Jin shyly apologizes for the trouble, but Ash gently reassures him. Ash worries that he might be unconscious for several days longer than Dean. He is concerned, where is his butler who left on his own? Jin sharply tells Ash that he was abandoned, while the butler left him alone. With concern, Jin offers his home as a safe place for Ash. Finally, they find themselves near Jin's sturdy framed house, standing inside the city walls. In the simple dwelling, Jin warmly greets Ash and invites him to sit. Ash praises his taste, and Jin is pleased that he repaired the rented house. Jin becomes embarrassed when he realizes he smells strongly of wild wolves. He shyly asks if Ash would like to order a hot bath. He promises to prepare the bath himself and tells Ash to wait there. Standing by the well, he decides not to go to the public baths, it's too dirty there. Next to the crackling fireplace stands a large wooden tub with hot water ready. Jin nodded towards the stairs. The toilet is upstairs and said he would be upstairs himself. Climbing the stairs, he intends to prepare a guest bed for Ash. He quietly thinks that he wants to install a real bath in this house. Already clean, they settle down with cups of tea, and Jin asks if they should start. Ash trustingly puts himself in Jin's hands as the procedure is about to begin. Jin intently gazes at the tiny bird spirit on Ash's shoulder. The bird begins pecking incessantly, its beak becoming a blurred spot of motion. Jin gently touches the bird and, as if enchanted, wonders how to get rid of the color of light. With a final burst of energy, the magical necklace suddenly snapped and broke. Ash lets out a painful scream when the connection suddenly breaks. He staggered and fell forward while Jin apologized for the suddenness. Holding Ash, Jin notices that her chest is too flat to cause even the slightest arousal. He gently laid her on the bed, trying to bring her to consciousness. Jin sternly warned the freed bird, do not take revenge on Ash. He gently strokes the little bird and whispers to him to rest after what he has been through. The little bird peacefully settled on the pillow next to the sleeping ash tree. Jin watches her and sighs with relief. Everything went easier than he expected. Jin decides it's time to arrange the third floor while his guest Ash recovers. Time passes and he works tirelessly, moving books and other household items. He brings a tray with a drink to the still unconscious Ash's bed. Jin reads quietly, but his eyes constantly watch the guest closely. From home, leaning against the mountain, he calls out the name of his friend Rish. He apologizes to Rish for neglecting him lately, gently strokes the happy creature, which cheerfully wags its tail. Rish blissfully enjoys the gentle scratches, his fur looks fluffy and thick. Jin notices that Ash shows no signs of waking up soon. Suddenly, a voice sharply called his name. He jumped up, torn from his thoughts. He turns around and sees Mistu, Rudiel, and Pal have appeared in his room. Surprised, Jin asked his divine guests why they were here. Pal apologized for the sudden visit and said he had a request for him. Rudiel begs him, please, give names to the spirits that fled there. Mistu says that all the trouble is due to the careless use of his sister's magic. She already sees that the whimsical and intrusive nature of his sister will soon push her to a reckless act. She sadly says that many little spirits have already been spent and disappeared. Jin repeats the unfamiliar name Namina and clearly looks surprised by this new information. Suddenly, with annoyance, he realizes that Namyana is the very sphere of light. Jin burns with rage, not understanding why the entity that absorbs power does not stop his sister. Mistu fears that if his sister can see spirits, she will subjugate them all. Pal confesses the spirits are so noisy that she can no longer endure it. Rudiel warns anxiously, this situation will have a wide impact and significantly limit the hero. Mistu urges Jin, let him see the spirits himself, only then will he understand. She tells him, look out the window, you will see the full scale of this problem. Jin took a deep breath to calm down, preparing for this place. Blinking, his gaze changed at the very moment Rudiel ordered him to look. He was petrified with horror, seeing shelves filled with countless tiny round spirits. Mistu says they fled to him because of his ability to free them. Rudiel says that by giving them names, we will protect them from subjugation. If his magic is truly strong, the spirits will surely choose him. Jen is stunned. He doesn't believe that so many spirits can be named at once. A friend gently calms him, for now names can simply be numbers. She adds that any name called without hesitation is suitable for now. Jin puzzles over what he sees as a contradiction in the spirit's logic. He felt he can give numerical names to those who lent him their power. With determination in his heart, he prepares for the task, knowing it is for his peaceful life. The naming process begins when he methodically calls out loud, red, green. He continues, giving them names like yellow 1, red 2, and blue 1. After 2 hours, the tedious task is still ongoing. He has reached yellow 52. Exhausted, he collapses on the table and says he needs a little rest. A small spirit gently nudges him on the cheek, encouraging him to continue. He suddenly sits up, remembering that he must go into the house and check on Ash. He sighs with relief and, using the transition skill, instantly teleports away. He successfully breaks free from the crowd, but Mr. jokingly asks who Ash is. A little bird lightly flaps its wings and gently perches on Jin's shoulder. He assures the curious Mistu that the little one is a spirit. Jin says that after freeing her from the spirit, he now takes under protection the Ash that has fallen. Mistu listens to his explanation, and suddenly anxiety appears on her face. She dramatically announces that the unconscious Ash has fallen into a crisis of maidens. Mistu stands over the sleeping Ash and is still worried about the girl's crisis. Jin is confusedos. Mistu clearly perceive Ash as a woman. He inwardly denies any shameful intentions toward the sleeping girl. Miss To winked and explained that she was not talking about that crisis. She casts a spell and confidently says that now everything will be fine. She proudly explains, this spell prevents Eshu from messing with the toilet in his sleep. The Jin thanks her, embarrassed that he hadn't thought of such a practical thing himself. He abruptly changes the subject and asks Miss To what the name of that little bird is. The Jin explains that he used the evaluation technique and found out that the bird was named Ru. He tells the curious Miss To that his previous contract was terminated. The little bird, he says, wants him to give her a new name. He grimaces at his terrible taste in names and brushes off Fluffy-chan. Seeing the beautiful blue feathers, he was inspired and began inventing a new name. He suggests the name Eju, and the bird looks up with interest. The bird gently presses against him as if blessing the new name. Jin explained that he took his name from the Italian word Azzurri. Then he asks the newly named Azza to watch over the sleeping Ash. He feels that Ash will be upset if the bird disappears as soon as she wakes up. Jin and Mistu agree to take on the task again, naming the spirits. Later that night, under the starry sky, more guests appeared outside. Jin was surprised to see that Kato and Ish also came to help. He begins again the long task, naming the colorful spirits that hover. Finally finishing, he decided to visit them once or twice a month. Pal strictly tells him to wait before he tries to use his light magic. A dazzling flash of light burst out, stunning him, while Mistu looked at him in delight. Pal assures him, now it is safe. He has dimmed the light with darkness. Ish and Mistu explain that it was the work of many light spirits. Kato sternly reminds him of the danger not knowing one's limits. Jin understands. Now he needs to imagine his magic much more precisely and with full concentration. Suddenly his stomach growled and it became clear. The magical experiments were over. Jin announces it is time for the group of spirits to have dinner. He politely asks if they would like to eat a little, just in case. They all shout out their specific requests, and he feels very uneasy because of it. Meanwhile, Jin prepares a real meal, soup, rice, and fish. He enjoys his tasty butajuru soup, his face glowing with pure satisfaction. A simple, warm dish like a hug after a long night. Mistu happily savors honey, and Pal elegantly sips wine from a glass. Two elder spirits, Kato and Rudiel, contentedly savor their simple food. Jin feels that this whole scene is terribly unreal, especially one detail. The young spirit stoically eats ordinary salt from a bowl. Jin worries about Ishi's health, but the boy is completely indifferent. This prompts him to ask, can spirits even eat human food? The city explains, spirits in human form can eat, but they cannot taste it. She explains that spirits without human form feed on what corresponds to their essence. Jin understands, and just then his companion Rich appears. He gently asks the creature to wait. They are still eating. Powell's face hardened when she accused her former master of intrigues. Jin does not understand why she suddenly got so angry at the little creature. Miss Hito thought it was so cute before, they couldn't even approach Rich. She apologizes and sincerely admits that they still somewhat distrust Rich. Jin was completely confused by the strange interaction between the spirits. An old god named Kato reveals the truth to Jin. Rich was once a god who shook the world. He continues his dark story against the backdrop of an image of a creature with a self-satisfied, seemingly innocent look. Jin is in complete shock. Could his dear friend be an alpha dog? The young goddess Mistu looks on, eyes full of incomprehension. The term alpha is completely foreign to her. Sitting at the table with Rish, Jin enthusiastically explains what a #1 leader in PACS is. He excitedly explains the rules that people need to know to properly behave with such pack animals. Miss Hito throws out, Rish is a wolf spirit. Can he really be directly compared to a dog? Jean glanced at the others and pondered, do different rules really apply to wolves and spirits? Kato issues a final warning, reminding that Rish was once very intelligent and even knew how to speak. Looking at his dear friend, Jean decided, for now he is simply dear to him. He thanks Kato for the warning and promises to take care and think about it later. Suddenly Mistu leans closer and calls Jean her dear honey, which embarrasses him. When the gods prepare to depart, Misto waves his hand and entrusts the care to the genes of other spirits. The black-haired goddess throws Jean one last inquisitive glance and leaves. She looks at Riesh, who is gasping for breath, and calls him a noble, lonely wolf. Jean stands alone at night, not taking his eyes off the place where the gods disappeared. He quietly contemplates the goddess's words, Riesh is a lonely wolf. Riesh playfully rolls onto his back and Jean wonders, is this all just a clever performance? Having gathered enough evening worries, he decides to take a bath and go to sleep. The next day he walks the streets of the town with a new assignment. In the shop he finally uncovers the truth why he came to this pottery town, to order a bath. Admiring the tea set he mentally decides, later I will buy myself new dishes. Outside, the large brick kilns of the city rise menacingly against the gloomy sky. Potter Malcolm introduces himself, guessing that Jean has an idea for a new product. Jean smiles, he has an idea for a bath and he immediately introduces himself. Holding a scroll with his sketch, he waits for Potter's thoughtful response. Malcolm even exclaims that this is a true godsend. Recently, a nobleman was interested in a bath. A sudden vision of his sister and her friend finally confirms to Jean who the nobles are. Jean gladly offers to help with the design, and Malcolm agrees that it is truly worth it. As Jean walks away, he is overwhelmed by a strange feeling as if their lives are unexpectedly intertwined. In a quiet, sunlit room, a young man with light, ashen hair slowly begins to stir. Ash suddenly wakes up, eyes wide open in confusion. He is in an unfamiliar room. Jean leans over him, asking if everything is all right, and Ash sincerely thanks him for the help. Ash says that his back hurts, and Jean suggests that it is because he slept for so long. Ash looks at the starry sky outside and cannot decide, is it morning or evening? Jean raised 3 fingers and calmly informed the stunned Ash that it was the 3rd day. Ash apologizes for the little bird, but Jean just waves his hand and does not take his worries about the inconvenience seriously. He admits that while Ash was unconscious, he gave the little bird a new name. Ash asks what name Jean chose for the bird that gently rubbed against his finger. Jean looked at him and simply said the bird's new name, Azu. Ash breaks into a warm, gentle smile and says that it is a nice name. Ash explains that the fact that the spirit accepted the name means it has grown attached to Jean. Suddenly, Jean notices how handsome Ash's face looks without his usual furrowed brow. Ash smiles, the bird Azu also seems to be very attached to him. He clarifies that Ash is a handsome young man who attracts certain people. Jean sternly warns Ash, don't fall for tricks, don't end up in someone's bed. A drop of sweat appeared on Jean's temple as he thought about this awkward situation. Ash, embarrassed and a little worried, asks if it was Jean who deceived him. The word bed made Ash jump suddenly. He realized what really lay behind his question. The Jinn quickly calmed the still uncertain Ash. He was safe and had not been deceived. He suggests cooking soup, and Ash asks if he can really stay. The Jinn insists that he is not so heartless as to throw him out into the street in the middle of the night. With a warm smile, he encourages Ash, become better and take back your money that was stolen from you by scammers. Ash agrees and adds that he also needs to pay rent. Jean finds this very fair. Later, they found themselves outside, in front of a large timber-framed building in the city. In the noisy tavern, amid laughter and clinking glasses, a voice suddenly rings out. Note. Jean and Ash lifted their eyes from the table. Their attention was drawn by the call. The stooped butler, by the way, rushed with relief to Ash and solemnly called him his master. Jean watches as Note respectfully bows before Ash in the middle of the tavern. He scans the crowd, sees spirits in several visitors, but not the one he is looking for. A man with chestnut hair appears Dean and greets the group with a smile. Dean, with an apologetic smile, offers Jean to buy a drink to smooth over their tense first meeting. Note solemnly introduces himself and explains his role. He is Ash's uninvited companion. He said grimly that a few more people in their group would change nothing. Large wooden mugs filled with frothy beer stand on the table waiting for the celebration. Jean sees a tiny spirit on Dean's shoulder and curiously notices how naturally he gets along with them. Dean explains that his sister Amal went to the spirit gazebo to be cleansed. He sighs and adds, Emil has to fix her spoiled attitude so she can get her job back. The black panel whispers, a joke from a random spirit can happen to anyone. Ash sternly warns, such pranks sometimes turn into terrible tragedies. Dean nodded at Ash's warning, feeling the full seriousness of his sister's situation. To himself, Ash notes that Dean, although he looks frivolous, is actually quite smart. Having sipped his drink, he tells Dean that the money stolen by swindlers will soon be returned to him. While Jean grumbles about the wet nuts, Dean casually says that he is staying overnight at an inn. Dean asks if it is possible to rent a 2-room house for a short term. Jean took a sip of ale and with guilty pleasure thought about what it is like to drink while underage in this world. Dean catches Jean's gaze, preparing to ask him for a favor. He asks Jean if he would like to keep company with a mid-level adventurer. Dean explains that the traveler is not very strong, but he can always be relied upon. Jean readily agreed to the offer and said that such an acquaintance would greatly help him. Dean suggests, let's meet the next day at the same time and continue. When they part ways, Ash stops and lets them know he has one last word. Ash warns both Jean and Dean, you are strange, so be careful. Jean jokingly tells Ash to smooth his eyebrows if something seems strange to him. Food peeks from around the corner, and boils with anger. It is certain that some strange people will definitely come. A new chapter begins. Jean wakes up in a cozy bed, his eyes still heavy from sleep. He gets up and gently greets his fluffy friend Rich. Good morning. Holding Rich in his arms, he looked with an admiring ooh at what was outside the window. He looks out the window at the snow-covered mountain and suddenly notices that it is snowing. He starts preparing breakfast. The soup quietly bubbles on the stove and the egg sizzles along with the bacon. We see Jean generously spreading a thick layer of jam on a slice of toast. He firmly bit off a large, tasty piece of toast that he had made himself. He enjoys the combination of sour plum jam and cheese. The cheese stretches in a long thread. Sipping the drink, he quietly reflects on the approaching winter. The memory of his miserable days in the mountains sharply contrasts with the present coziness. When he finished eating, he quietly thanked for the food, looking at the now empty plate. He decided the time had come to prepare for the meeting with Dean's acquaintance. He steps into the medieval town of Canaan, ready for the introduction. In a dark cloak, Jean stands and waits for the meeting to begin.